Chapter 990. However, now that things had come to this, he had to explain it. This fellow was not a good person at all. He always believed in the concept of cutting weeds if the roots were not removed. What cooperation and enmity were all nonsense. Finding Ash Cloud Excian to protect him was a lie. He wanted to find a chance to kill him. Normally, the best way was to flatten the entire Heartless Palace. However, it was impossible for him to flatten a colossus like the Heartless Palace with his current abilities. However, taking advantage of his current status as an Imperial envoy, it was still possible to think of a way to kill Grey Cloud Excian first. This was why he spent so much effort to get Ash Cloud Excian to protect him. The reason, first of all, the chances of encountering danger in the Netherworld were very high, so they really needed the help of an expert. With Grey Cloud Excian's current cultivation and the Heartless Palace's 3-in-1 sword drawing stance, he was really a suitable candidate. Just the thought of having such an expert by his side made him excited. Secondly, as he said, Ash Cloud Excian might not dare to do anything to him in the open, but it was completely possible for him to do something in the dark, especially in the Netherworld where even immortal emperors could not interfere. Now, the only way was to tie Sunyin Excian's safety together, then Sunyin Excian wouldn't dare to make a move against him. Lastly, this was what he wanted to do the most. As long as he brought Ash Cloud Excian with him, he would have a chance to get rid of this hidden danger. After all, Ash Cloud Excian would not dare to do anything to him at that time. Instead, he would have to work hard to protect him, and he would be able to do anything to him. Such a black-hearted method of killing several birds with one arrow had always been easy for him. Is that really the case? Deming Luan looked at Yu Qianzhou suspiciously. Although he said that, he did not think that Yu Qianzhou had the guts or the ability to do anything to Ash Cloud Excian. He had underestimated Yu Qianzhou's character. If I don't do this, who can guarantee that Ash Cloud Excian will not do anything to me in the dark? Yu Qianzhou smiled bitterly as he cupped his fists and said, "Please help me, Senior Great Bright Wheel, for the sake of Senior Yun and Senior Wei." Deming Luan's eyes flickered with suspicion. He was experienced enough to sense that something was wrong. Asking his enemy to protect him? This was the first time he had heard of such a thing after living for so many years. He didn't know what this guy's brain was made of. How could he think of such a way? But after thinking about it, he felt that Yu Qianzhou's concerns were not wrong. He paused and said, "I'll try my best. As for whether the Immortal Palace will agree to your request, I can't guarantee it. Wait for my news." Hee. "Thank you, Senior. I won't disturb you any longer. Go on with your business." Yu Qianzhou bowed and left. He was confident in Deming Luan's ability. Since the other party had promised to try his best, then this matter should not be far from the truth. As for what the other party would say to make the Immortal Palace agree, that was not something he should worry about. In the large conference room on the 21st floor of the World Commerce Association, under the watchful eyes of Yu Qianzhou, Hu Changshou distributed the corresponding amount of restriction-breaking pills, marrow-cleansing pills, and Immortal Ascension pills to everyone. Everyone looked at the immortal pills in their hands with mixed feelings. Yu Qianzhou had already explained the pros and cons of taking these immortal pills. Although they could quickly improve their cultivation, there would be a certain shackle on their future cultivation after taking them. Very few people could break through to the great immortal stage and above. Looking at the complicated expressions on everyone's faces, Yu Qianzhou understood what everyone was thinking. If these immortal pills fell into the hands of ordinary soul formation cultivators with no background, they would definitely be overjoyed. But these people were not ordinary soul formation cultivators. Each of them had extraordinary wisdom. Although they were temporarily hiding here, who didn't want their cultivation to reach the peak of cultivation one day? I've already explained everything clearly to everyone. It's up to you whether you want to take it or not. I won't force you. But there's something I want to remind everyone. Yu Qianzhou looked around at everyone and said in a low voice, "If anyone is willing to take it and use it to improve their cultivation, when you go to the Immortal Ascension passage guarded by the Immortal Palace to forge your immortal body, you must go in batches. When the first batch returns, the second batch will go again to avoid unnecessary trouble. At this point, he didn't say anything else and walked out alone. As for why he didn't use the heavenly lightning to forge everyone's immortal body, he had his own considerations. The hundreds of people here were all in the open. If they used immortal pills to forcefully increase their cultivation, no one could say anything. But if they suddenly all reached the immortal realm without going through the immortal ascension passage guarded by the immortal palace, not to mention the suspicion of others, the immortal palace would first set their eyes on the World Commerce Association. Some things had to be sacrificed before they could gain. It was impossible for everything to be smooth sailing forever. Yu Qianqiu could only sigh slightly. He still had to hide what he had to hide from everyone for the time being. Who knew that once he left the conference room, he would receive a jade talisman from Wei Chuanxiu, asking him to quickly go to the rooftop. Yu Qianqiu arrived at the rooftop with a face full of suspicion. Just as he was wondering what Wei Chuanxiu was doing, he saw that Deming Luan was also there. He immediately walked over cheerfully and cupped his hands. "Greetings, Master." Wei Chuanxiu stared at him with an annoyed expression and asked, "What the hell are you doing? You actually need Grey Cloud Messenger to protect you? Did you take the wrong medicine?" Clearly, Deming Luan had already told them about this. "As you wish." Deming Luan snorted. The Immortal Palace has already sent a decree to Heartless Palace's sect master Wang Qing. Yu Qianqiu's eyes instantly lit up. He asked, "Heartless Palace agreed? You don't have to worry about this." Deming Luan's gaze suddenly stared in the direction of the Heartless Palace's branch. He said indifferently, "There is no room for negotiation with the decree from the Immortal Palace. He has to agree whether he wants to or not." Hee. That's good, that's good. Yu Qianqiu rubbed his hands happily. He was worried that this matter would be troublesome. He didn't expect Deming Luan to help him settle it so quickly. He was indeed capable. Who knew that Deming Luan would look at him coldly and pour cold water on him? Don't be too happy too early. The reason why the Immortal Palace can send this decree is because of the Immortal Emperor. The higher-ups want me to tell you that if the Immortal Emperor isn't satisfied with the result, he will hand you over to the Heartless Palace and let them do whatever they want to you. Yu Qianqiu couldn't smile anymore. It was as if something was strangling his neck. He then said awkwardly, "It should be fine. As long as Zhangyan Exine cooperates with me, I won't disappoint the Immortal Emperor. Please help me pass this message to the Immortal Palace." He was indeed scared just now. After all, no one could guarantee that the Immortal Emperor would be satisfied with what they came up with. But on second thought, if he really messed things up, he really didn't believe that the Immortal Palace had the ability to capture him. He still had some confidence in his ability to escape. Deming Luan nodded slightly. His gaze paused on Wei Chuanxiu and Yun Peng's faces. Then, he slowly took out a golden token and handed it to Yu Qianqiu. "You said you want to go to the Netherworld, but the Netherworld is not like the Celestial Realm. It is already out of the Immortal Palace's control. It is the Emperor of the Underworld's territory. Plus, the Emperor of the Underworld and the Immortal Emperor have always had small conflicts. No one can guarantee their safety if they go there. Most importantly, even though the Emperor of the Underworld is revered in the Netherworld, because the territory is too vast, the majority of the places have always been in a chaotic situation where warlords are divided. This is the token of authority of the World Commerce Chamber of Commerce. Maybe it can help you at a critical moment." Wei Chuanxiu and Yun Peng looked at each other without saying anything. They both glanced at Yun Peng with complicated expressions. Yu Qianqiu, who received the token, was also slightly startled. On one side of the golden token, the World Commerce Chamber of Commerce's logo was engraved. On the other side, there was a moonlit night scene of clouds passing by and a bright moon shining in the sky. This token was the symbol of him, Deming Luan, representing the Immortal Palace to be in charge of the World Commerce Chamber of Commerce. Regardless of whether this token was useful in the Netherworld or not, Yu Qianqiu would remember the Deming Luan's friendship. However, this was a different matter. He still had to ask clearly what he needed to ask. It would be troublesome if he did something stupid in the Netherworld. Yu Qianqiu paused and asked, Didn't you say that the Immortal Emperor and the Emperor of the Underworld always had small conflicts? Your authority token is also useful in the Netherworld? Wei Chuanxiu and Yun Peng were more or less confused about this. The Deming Luan faintly smiled. Although the Netherworld is chaotic, there is always an Onyx army everywhere in the Netherworld to suppress those restless fellows. This Onyx army is under the command of Madame Hei Qi. Madame Hei Qi is also the only subordinate of the Emperor of the Underworld who has the most frequent business dealings with the Immortal World. Although she has never been to the Immortal World, because I am in charge of the World Commerce Chamber in the Immortal World, I have personally gone to the Onyx Palace in the Netherworld several times. Among the people in the Immortal World, I am the one who has the most contact with Madame Hei Qi, and we have some friendship. She will give me some face if there is anything. Madame Hei Qi? Wei Chuanxiu asked curiously. I have never heard of this person before. I cultivated. Is she the woman who is rumored to have hooked up with the Emperor of the Underworld? She is quite a fast climber. Yu Qianqiu was also curious. He had heard of Madame Hei Qi in the Immortal World. It was said that she had a high position in the Netherworld. However, these were all rumors. He didn't know the specifics. Hooked up with the Emperor of the Underworld? Is it that easy to hook up with the Emperor of the Underworld? Forget it. In short, this woman is the Emperor of the Underworld's favorite concubine. Her power in the Netherworld is indeed extraordinary. Deming Luan shook his head and looked at Yu Qianqiu. You are in the chaotic land of the Netherworld. If you encounter any trouble, you can use my token to find the Onyx army. I believe Madame Hei Qi will ask the Onyx army to take care of you. With the Onyx army's illustrious reputation in the chaotic land, they can at least save you some trouble. Yu Qianqiu nodded and asked hesitantly, I wonder what kind of person this Madame Hei Qi is? Is it easy to get along with her? Deming Luan paused for a moment and said slowly with an expressionless face, her cultivation is about the same as mine, but her heart is higher than the sky. She may be ambitious, but her ability is average. She is just relying on the prestige of the Emperor of the Underworld. Unfortunately, she doesn't know her place. In short, she is just a vicious woman. You won't have any conflict of interest with her. As long as you don't offend her, she won't do anything to you. Chapter 991. Got it. Yu Qianqiu put away the token. He was a little excited. What did it mean to be on his side? This was what it meant to be on his side. Yun Peng, who had been silent all this while, suddenly asked, Yu Qianqiu brought your token to the Netherworld to show off. Will you be in trouble if news of this gets back? Deming Luan smiled. What trouble can I get into? I just accepted the Immortal Emperor's decree to help Yu Qianqiu as much as I can. If someone asks, I'll just say this. Hearing this, the three heaved a sigh of relief. Some people were happy, while others were worried. In the back room of the Passionless Palace's branch, there was a series of crashing noises. The disciples who ran in to see what was going on were chased out by a shout of scram. The tables and chairs inside were all smashed to pieces, and Sanyan Xian was panting heavily as he stood on the broken wood with a red face and neck. High Priest, please calm down. An old man on the side sighed. This person was called Meihe. He was also one of the priests of Passionless Palace. His position in Passionless Palace was second only to Grey Cloud Xian. He came because Passionless Palace had received the decree from the Immortal Palace. It asked Grey Cloud Xian to protect Yu Qianqiu. After Passionless Palace's sect master Wang Qing received the decree, he was silent for a long time. No one would be able to accept that they had to protect their enemy after their grandson was killed. Therefore, Wang Qing didn't send a message to Grey Cloud Xian. Instead, he asked Meihe to come personally. He was afraid that Grey Cloud Xian couldn't understand and asked Meihe to do the thinking. Before Meihe came, Wang Qing had told him that if Grey Cloud Xian couldn't accept it, he could contact him. As expected, Grey Cloud Xian was furious. He really couldn't understand it. He almost destroyed the Passionless Palace's branch. Finally, under Meihe's repeated persuasion, Grey Cloud Xian contacted Wang Qing angrily. Wang Qing didn't try to persuade him. He only told him that it was true. He did receive the decree from the Immortal Palace. He told him to think of the big picture. Then, Wang Qing cut off the connection, which led to the current scene. Just for a song, just for a song. The Immortal Palace has gone too far. Sect leader, why are you forcing me like this? Why are you forcing me like this? Zhangyan Xian was so angry that his entire body trembled as he roared, "Yu Qianqiu." To him, this was simply an extraordinary humiliation. Not to mention the fact that he couldn't accept it emotionally. Once this matter was spread out, he would definitely become the laughingstock of the three realms. He quickly glanced at his surroundings. Fortunately, he had set up a soundproof barrier in advance. Otherwise, if Greycloud Xian's voice was heard, it might cause a lot of trouble for the Heartless Palace. Using his feet to push aside the broken tables and chairs, he walked to Greycloud Xian and said with a bitter smile, "You can't blame the sect master for this. Others see our Heartless Palace as the #1 sect in the immortal world, but don't tell me you and I don't know the situation our Heartless Palace is in? It's as dangerous as a pile of eggs. Why are they bullying people like this? Why are you bullying me like this? What do you take us for? Were they worse than pigs and dogs? This is a great humiliation." Greycloud Xian clenched his fists and choked with sorrow. Tears streamed down his face, covering his clothes. The scene was very tragic. This undoubtedly explained the problem. He knew that there were some things he couldn't fight back. High Priest. He grabbed Greycloud Xian's clenched fists and shook them. "Aren't we worse than pigs and dogs in the Immortal Palace's eyes? Do you think the sect master is feeling good? But we have to look at the big picture." As he spoke, he suddenly transmitted his voice. "I'm afraid that the Immortal Palace is using Yu Qianqiu to test our Heartless Palace." "What does this mean?" "Before we came, the sect master told me to tell you, endure humiliation for the greater good. The sect master told me to tell you that his cultivation level is probably not far from breaking through to the late Immortal Emperor stage. Also, our Heartless Palace already has the 6th form of the sword drawing style. The sect master has been hiding it all this time, waiting for the moment when he's certain of victory." Greycloud Xian's body shook when he heard this. His eyes were filled with tears as he exclaimed, "The 6th form. Could it be that the sect master?" He wanted to say that the sect master was waiting for the right time to challenge the Immortal Emperor, but he patted his fists and stopped him with telepathic transmission. "High Priest, be careful with your words. The sect leader has never mentioned this matter to anyone. He doesn't even feel at ease communicating with you through the transmission technique. But in order to let you know what's going on, he leaked this matter and specially asked me to make this trip. We can't let down the sect leader's painstaking efforts. What the sect master needs the most now is time. Once the time is right, all the old and new grudges can be settled in one day." Greycloud Xian was stunned and didn't speak. His eyes were shining. He really didn't expect that the Heartless Palace only had 5 sword stances for so many years. Ever since he was in a desperate situation, he instantly comprehended and executed the 5th stance. He was the clearest about its might. He was confident that few experts in the intermediate stage of the 3 realms would be able to block this move of his. But he didn't expect that the sect master had already created the 6th form of the sword drawing style. How powerful would it be? He couldn't help but get excited thinking about it. He naturally understood the sect master's painstaking efforts. He wanted him to endure the humiliation and give the sect master more time. Once the sect master broke through to the late stage Immortal Emperor, the Heartless Palace's 6th form of the sword drawing style would be revealed in the celestial world. At that time, it would definitely shock the 3 realms. For the sect master, for the Heartless Palace, Greycloud Xian, will swallow this humiliation. Greycloud Xian clenched his fists and said while gritting his teeth. Since he could get to this point in the celestial world, he naturally knew what was good and what was bad. Once the sect leader Wang Qing defeated the celestial emperor with the 6th move, the sword drawing style, then the status of him, the #2 figure of the Heartless Palace, in the celestial world could be imagined. High Priest, you're so righteous. He patted Greycloud Xian's fist. His tensed gaze relaxed, and he heaved a sigh of relief in his heart. Before he came, Wang Qing had told him that if he told Greycloud Xian such a top-secret matter and Greycloud Xian still wasn't willing to endure the humiliation, then what was the point of keeping such a person in the Heartless Palace? To be exact, if Mei had seen even the slightest hesitation in Greycloud Xian, he would have immediately launched a fatal sneak attack when Greycloud Xian was unprepared. That way, he would never have the chance to reveal the secret of the sect master Wang Qing. After that, the Heartless Palace would naturally push the blame onto Greycloud Xian. If Greycloud Xian was dead, then Yu Qianshou wouldn't have an excuse to say that he was worried that Greycloud Xian would backstab him and affect his work for the Immortal Emperor. At least he would be able to answer to the Immortal Palace. In reality, the Heartless Palace's sect master Wang Qing didn't want to be too ruthless. After all, apart from him, the only person in the Heartless Palace who had mastered the three-sword drawing style was Greycloud Xian. He was definitely a great help to the Heartless Palace. If Wang Qing really defeated the Immortal Emperor in the future, how could he not have a reliable top-notch expert under him? However, people at Wang Qing's level would weigh the pros and cons of everything and would never be soft-hearted when it came to abandoning things. Greycloud Xian didn't know that he had already taken a trip to the gates of hell. Instead, he swore solemnly and gritted his teeth. Yu Qianshou, let's see how long you can be so smug for. Mei sneered. He's just a fox borrowing the tiger's might. A mantis trying to stop a chariot is overestimating its own capabilities. High Priest, you'll have to suffer for a while. After the Immortal Emperor's wedding, we'll find a chance to deal with him. At this moment, a disciple outside weakly shouted, High Priest, World Commerce's sect master Yu Qianshou is outside asking to see you. Damned bastard, he really came quickly. Is he here to humiliate me? Greycloud Xian pointed his finger towards the outside, once again with a look of uncontrollable anger. Mei shook his head at him. He looked at the messy room and quickly put all the messy things into his storage bracelet. Greycloud Xian calmed his emotions and wiped his face to dry the tears on his clothes. Then, he removed the soundproof barrier and shouted, Get him in here. This shout was so loud that even Yu Qianshou, who was outside the gate, was shocked, let alone the yes-man disciples outside. He muttered in his heart, could it be that this old man is so daring that he dares to harm me? He wondered if Heartless Palace had conveyed the Immortal Palace's decree to this old man. However, he felt that he was worrying too much. Since this old man wanted him to get in here, then he must have received a notice. Yu Qianshou chuckled. He didn't wait for the disciple who went to report to come out to summon him, and he walked in casually. With Greycloud Xian's shout, the other disciples of Heartless Palace didn't stop him. However, the disciples who came here to trade looked at him with disdain. They didn't know why this guy wouldn't let Greycloud Xian go. They guessed that this guy was using his master's power. With the Immortal Emperor's decree, he was purposely humiliating Greycloud Xian. Was this revenge for the humiliation he suffered in the Paradise Wonderland? When Yu Qianshou entered the inner room of the rear hall, he discovered that the room was empty. He couldn't help but feel that it was strange. However, when he saw traces of tables and chairs on the floor, he quickly swept his gaze around the room. When he saw traces of things being smashed on the floor and walls, he immediately understood everything. Someone was probably furious and was smashing things to vent his anger. Finally, his gaze landed on an old man who was standing side by side with Greycloud Xian. Someone who could stand side by side with Greycloud Xian naturally had a high status in Heartless Palace. Yu Qianshou was slightly startled. Then, he smiled and cupped his hands at Greycloud Xian. Elder Greycloud Xian, may I know who this person is? Without Greycloud Xian's introduction, Mei snorted coldly and said, This old man is Heartless Palace's consecrator, Mei. You are that infamous scoundrel sect master Yu Qianshou in the Immortal world? The Immortal Palace's decree only asked Greycloud Xian to protect Yu Qianshou. It didn't say that he couldn't be humiliated. These words were no less than a slap to the face. Yu Qianshou was unhappy when he heard it. He could be afraid of anyone but the Heartless Palace. If he retreated now, Grey Cloud Faith's face would be ugly in the future. Damn! This can't be allowed to continue. His face darkened. I don't care if you don't have a river or a ditch. You're already so old. Watch your mouth. Don't ask for trouble. Chapter 992. How dare you? Mei shouted angrily. One of his sleeves bulged as if it was filled with air, and his killing intent instantly boiled. Enchanting pressed his hand and said gloomily, "Don't bother with him. It's too easy for him to kill him like this." Mei was slightly stunned. He was here to persuade Enchanting to swallow the humiliation. Why was it Enchanting who was persuading him now? Little did he know that some things did not happen to him. Putting oneself in someone else's shoes and experiencing it personally were two completely different things. With his identity and status, how many people dared to bully him? Yu Qianzhou's mouth was born to provoke people like them. Ordinary people could not bear it, let alone a person who was usually high and mighty. Kill me? Yu Qianzhou's face wrinkled and he sneered, "I'm standing right here. Try and touch me if you have the guts." "I don't think you have the guts." His eyes fell on Enchanting's gloomy old face, and he said word by word, "I'm not in the mood to talk nonsense with you now. I'll give you 1 day to prepare. Leave with me tomorrow. Goodbye." He turned and left. "You're courting death," Enchanting shouted. He was indeed irritated. Mei was shocked and quickly pulled him back. Yu Qianzhou looked back at the two of them and sneered. He left without saying a word. It could be said that he came in high spirits but returned in disappointment. He felt that he was not surprised at all. This was the effect he wanted. He wanted to test the other party's bottom line. In the end, only the two old brothers were left in the room. After a long time, Enchanting turned to Mei and said, "Now you know that this bastard should be killed." Mei felt a little dumbfounded and could only sigh slightly. "Let's focus on the overall situation." Then he frowned slightly and said, "Why do I feel that this matter is a little strange? Could this kid be plotting something? Him? How dare he?" Enchanting looked disdainful. Mei shook his head and said in a low voice, "How many people with his cultivation have you seen dare to treat us like this? How can he be so calm in front of us? How can an ordinary rogue have this kind of calmness? He probably had ulterior motives for doing so. High Reverend, it's best to be careful. He's just relying on the support of the Immortal Palace." Enchanting coldly snorted. Although that was what he said, it could be seen from his slightly contracted pupils that he was already on guard. Not long after the two of them calmed down, a disciple who was in charge of gathering information suddenly came to report that rumors were spreading in the illusory Immortal City, saying that the Immortal Palace had ordered the Grey Cloud letters to protect Yu Qianzhou. Upon hearing this news, Enchanting, who had finally calmed down, was stunned. Although he knew that this matter would spread sooner or later, and he would lose face sooner or later, it just had to come at this time. Without thinking, he immediately associated it with Yu Qianzhou. He was so angry that he almost vomited blood. He roared, "How dare you! Sooner or later, I'll tear you to pieces." With a flushed face, he swung his palm. Boom! A wall collapsed, and dust filled the air. The two brothers stood there motionlessly. The entire illusory Immortal City was indeed in an uproar because of this news. Everyone felt that this was impossible. How was it possible for Enchanting to protect the enemy who killed his grandson, Yu Qianzhou? Therefore, everyone continuously verified the authenticity of the news. In the end, the more they couldn't find the truth, the more exaggerated the rumors became. The next day, Yu Qianzhou, who had settled the matters of the World Commerce Association, once again descended in high spirits outside the Passionless Palace branch. He amiably nodded at the disciples who were originally entering and exiting the branch but were now stunned at the entrance. He smiled at the hostile Passionless Palace disciples and said, "Tell Enchanting that he can leave." As he watched the Passionless Palace disciples leave in a hurry, Yu Qianzhou calmly stood with his arms crossed and looked into the hall with a smile. He wanted to see if Songyun Xian could restrain himself by spreading the rumors all over the place and provoking Songyun Xian over and over again. If he didn't figure out the other party's bottom line, he would feel guilty. If the other party suddenly launched a sneak attack while the two of them were interacting, then he would be out of luck. It would be good to give the other party a heads up and strengthen the other party's immunity to provocation. Indeed, some time passed. The two gloomy brothers finally adjusted their mentality and slowly walked out. Under everyone's unblinking gaze, Songyun Xian stared at Yu Qianqiu and asked in a low voice, "Where are we going?" He more or less resigned to his fate. The disciples from the various sects who were watching the show looked at each other in tacit understanding. The meaning behind his words couldn't be clearer. Needless to say, the rumors were true. Yu Qianqiu chuckled and said, "You'll know when we get there." The corner of Songyun Xian's mouth twitched. He saw that Yu Qianqiu had already taken out a flying shuttle into the air and flashed onto it. He waved at him from above, indicating for him to come up quickly. As Mei cupped his hands to send him off, Songyun Xian finally gritted his teeth and flashed onto the shuttle. He tried his best to turn his head away from Yu Qianqiu's ugly face. "Where are we going?" Yu Qianqiu said slowly and unhurriedly, "The Netherworld." Songyun Xian was stunned. He turned around to look at the other party, only to see the other party reaching out to the front of the flying shuttle. He immediately sneered and said, "The decree I received from the Immortal Palace is only to protect you. I have no obligation to help you control the flying shuttle. The journey to the Netherworld is long. Don't you think that with your cultivation, it will be faster to control it? What does it have to do with me whether it's faster or not? I'm not in a hurry." Songyun Xian sneered again and again. It was already embarrassing enough. How could he help Yu Qianqiu control the flying shuttle in front of everyone? "I have nothing to say. If you ruin the Immortal Emperor's plan, I'm afraid you won't be able to bear the consequences." Yu Qianqiu was also stubborn. However, Songyun Xian was not moved. "Don't give me that. Do you think the people of the Immortal Palace are all idiots? Fine. I won't talk about this anymore. I don't want you to say that I'm using the Immortal Emperor to threaten you. You don't put the Immortal Emperor in your eyes anyway." Yu Qianqiu looked around the entire illusory immortal city and said, "I can control it too. I was just about to bring you around illusory immortal city a few more times and let everyone witness the might of your grey cloud trust." Songyun Xian snorted and slowly floated to the side of the flying shuttle. He sneered and said, "The flying shuttle is yours. Go around as many times as you want. Sorry, I won't be accompanying you." The conversation between the two of them was clearly heard by the people below, and some of them even couldn't help but laugh. "Good. Very good. You win." Ouch. At this time, Yu Qianqiu suddenly exclaimed. He clutched his chest and staggered a few steps on the flying shuttle as if his heart was in pain. Under Songyun Xian's cold gaze, the flying shuttle carrying Yu Qianqiu slowly landed in front of the Passionless Palace's branch gate. While everyone was looking at each other, Yu Qianqiu staggered to the back of the flying shuttle and sat down. He weakly waved his hand at the crowd and said intermittently, May I know who is willing to do a good deed and help me tell the Chamber of Commerce Alliance that I've been angered to the point where I'm depressed and my mental state isn't good. I'm afraid I'll need to rest for 1.5 years, and I'm afraid I'll miss the Immortal Emperor's important matter. I hope the Immortal Palace can find someone better to take on the heavy responsibility." After saying that, he lay on the flying shuttle and panted as if he could stop breathing at any time. Everyone was speechless. No matter what, he was the sect master of the World Commerce Alliance. This guy was really bold to play so openly and use the Immortal Emperor's matter to threaten others. But then again, if this matter really got out of hand, even if the Immortal Palace took care of Yu Qianqiu, how could he, Songyun Xian, who played along with Yu Qianqiu, have a good ending? This was clearly a case of the barefooted not afraid of those who wore shoes. He was acting shamelessly. Songyun Xian, who was in the air, and Mei He, who was at the gate, had dark expressions on their faces. The surroundings were completely silent. Everyone's gazes looked at Songyun Xian from time to time, then looked at Yu Qianqiu, who was about to fall asleep in the flying shuttle. High Priest. Mei's voice came to Zhang Yun Xian's ears with a long sigh. Zhang Yun Xian's expression changed. Right now, he wanted to skin Yu Qianqiu alive, but, in the end, he still gave in. In his eyes, Yu Qianqiu was just a little trash, and it was not worth it for him to be unlucky together with him. The figure in the air suddenly disappeared, and Zhang Yun Xian stood at the front of the flying shuttle on the ground. A gust of air rushed in all directions, and the flying shuttle suddenly stabbed into the sky. The passionless palace branch's gate was filled with boos and hisses. Yu Qianqiu, who was lying in the flying shuttle with his eyes half closed, finally opened his eyes. Looking at the white clouds floating in the blue sky, the resentment he felt from being humiliated in front of everyone in the paradise immortal realm was finally vented a little, and his entire body felt much better. Looking at Zhang Yun Xian in front of him, who didn't even turn his head back, the scenes that had happened in Wu Xiong's mansion once again appeared in his mind. In fact, it didn't take more than a day for the things that had happened in the hallucination immortal city to spread to Wu Xiong's external affairs Grand Commander's mansion in the paradise immortal realm. In the beautiful back garden, in a pavilion with rolled-up beaded curtains, the golden-robed external affairs Grand Commander's wife, Mu Tianjiao, was sitting in the pavilion with a frown on her face. Her father, Mu Bing, was constantly ridiculing Yu Qianqiu's shameless actions in the hallucination immortal city. Mu Bing, relying on his identity as the external affairs Grand Commander of Wu Xiong's immortal palace, could be said to frequently travel between the Four Links Chamber of Commerce and the Paradise Immortal Realm. He spent most of his time in the Paradise Immortal Realm, and most of the Four Links Chamber of Commerce's matters were handed over to his disciple, Nan Tianlong. Regarding this, he had nothing to worry about. With his current identity, even if he wasn't there to oversee the Four Links Chamber of Commerce, no one would dare to cause any trouble. There was no lack of people in the world who had been oppressed for a long time, but once they made a comeback, they instantly forgot everything. They enjoyed the feeling of getting whatever they wanted, and they even wantonly played with power. The world called these people petty people intoxicated by success. Mu Tianjiao held her forehead with one hand and placed her elbow on the stone table with a plate of fruits and ambrosia. I just don't understand why the Celestial Emperor would let that shameless person compose a song. It's simply the biggest joke in the world, father. Mu Tianjiao, who was deep in thought, suddenly raised her head and stopped Mu Bing from continuing. Her eyes were faintly filled with grief and indignation as she said, "Father, how dare you talk about the Celestial Emperor behind his back? Aren't you afraid of incurring his wrath and implicating me and Wu Xiong?" Mu Bing's expression changed, and he quickly looked around. Seeing that there was no one around, he heaved a sigh of relief, but his heart was still pounding. He also knew that he had gotten a little carried away just now and spoke without thinking. However, the atmosphere in the pavilion became a little awkward. Mu Bing was now more or less a taboo towards this daughter of his. After all of his glory came from this daughter. In the end, it was Mu Tianjiao's expression that eased first. No matter how bad the other party was, he was still her father. She faintly sighed and said, "Father, please don't talk nonsense in the future. Just treat it as thinking about your daughter's happiness and leave some leeway in your mouth." Of course. Of course. It was just a slip of the tongue, that's all. Seeing that his daughter was no longer angry, Mu Bing quickly took the opportunity to explain, "I'm not talking about the Celestial Emperor. In fact, what I want to say is that the real culprit is that woman with the surname Lu. She must have said something to Immortal Empress Ji Wu. Otherwise, why would the Celestial Emperor let that Yu Qianqiu compose a song? Look at that Yu Qianqiu, he's a typical despicable person. Once he succeeds, he considers everyone beneath him and acts recklessly in the illusionary immortal city." Mu Tianjiao slowly stood up, looked at Mu Bing, and earnestly said, "Father, listen to me. After all, that Yu Qianqiu once did our Mu clan a favor. Back in the divine ruin realm, if it wasn't for his help, would have already died there. Even if we don't put that aside, he doesn't have any deep hatred towards us, so why do you hate him so much?" "Just why? It's just that I can't stand his despicable behavior," Mu Bing weakly replied. In reality, it was because Yu Qianqiu made him lose face at Mu Tianjiao's wedding last time. His current temperament no longer allowed his subordinates to be rude to him, and Yu Qianqiu was now a typical servant in his eyes. Not to mention, Yu Qianqiu talked back to him in front of so many people, which seriously hurt his self-esteem. Recently, he had already prepared to use his powerful influence to teach Yu Qianqiu a good lesson and let Yu Qianqiu know what it meant to have a difference in status. Who would have thought that at this time, Yu Qianqiu would suddenly receive the decree of the Celestial Emperor? A decree personally issued by the Celestial Emperor. While Mu Bing felt a taboo, he was also a little jealous. As Wu Xiong's father-in-law, he had never received a decree from the Celestial Emperor, but a lowly servant actually received such an honor. Old resentment and current jealousy made his heart feel very uncomfortable. Whether he is a true gentleman or a despicable person, it has nothing to do with us. Mu Tianjiao suddenly paused as if she noticed something. Her bright eyes stared at Mu Bing's face, and she bit her lips. Father, do you want to do something to him? Oh. What does father-in-law want to do to who? A hearty laughter suddenly came from outside. The father and daughter turned their heads to look and saw Wu Xiong striding from the entrance of the garden with a smile on his face. Mu Bing also immediately smiled and quickly walked out of the pavilion. He looked at Wu Xiong and smiled. The Grand Commander has returned. Father-in-law. Wu Xiong very politely clasped his hands together, then reached out to grab Mu Tianjiao's hand. The two of them smiled at each other and walked into the pavilion. They sat on opposite sides of the stone table, giving off the feeling that they were close friends. Wu Xiong looked at Mu Bing, who followed them in, then looked at Mu Tianjiao and asked, Madam, what did you say father-in-law wants to do? Why don't you tell me? Chapter 993. Milord misheard. Mu Tianjiao shook her head helplessly. I just don't think it's a good idea for father to stay here for too long. He should go back and put more effort into managing the Four Links Chamber of Commerce. Mu Bing's expression changed slightly when he heard this. A trace of resentment flashed across his eyes as he looked at his daughter. He felt that his daughter was unhappy because he had spoken too much about Yu Qianqiu and was chasing him away. For a moment, his heart was filled with jealousy and hatred for Yu Qianqiu. Oh. Wu Xiong made a noncommittal sound and glanced at Mu Bing. After interacting with his father-in-law for a period of time, he naturally had some understanding of his character. He faintly smiled and said, Madam is worrying too much. Father-in-law will naturally arrange for someone to take care of the Four Links Chamber of Commerce. There is no need to personally attend to this matter. If it really doesn't work, it's better to close down the Four Links Chamber of Commerce and open a bigger one in hallucinatory Immortal City. That way, it'll be closer. If father-in-law agrees, I'll greet the Great Bright Will Keeper of the Chamber of Commerce Alliance and make things easier for you. Good. Great Commander, this is a good idea. Mu Bing smiled happily. No way. Mu Tianjiao shouted and suddenly stood up. She glared at Mu Bing and said sternly, Father, have you forgotten that mother died for the Four Links Chamber of Commerce? Are you really going to shut it down without any consideration for old ties? Her entire face turned pale and her expression turned stern. Tears appeared at the corners of her eyes. She had always been strong, but it had been a long time since she had cried. In fact, there was something she didn't say. If it wasn't for the Four Links Chamber of Commerce, if it wasn't for her mother's painstaking efforts, why would she have to compromise and marry here? The Four Links Chamber of Commerce held too many memories of her deceased mother. It could be said that it was her emotional sustenance and the home of her heart. It could not be desecrated. The pavilion instantly quieted down. Mu Bing stood there awkwardly. Wu Xiong was also slightly stunned. Mu Tianjiao had always been a gentle and virtuous woman in front of him. This was the first time he had seen her so angry, and it was directed at her father. After Wu Xiong came back to his senses, his face was filled with relief. From this, it could be seen that his woman was a woman who valued friendship. He had not misjudged her. He stood up and walked to Mu Tianjiao's side. He grabbed her hand and comforted her. Madam, don't be anxious. Since Madam is unwilling, As he said this, he looked at Mu Bing and said, I think we should drop this matter. Father-in-law, you may as well focus on running the Four Links Chamber of Commerce. If there is anything you need, just let me know. I will do my best to help. Once the Four Links Chamber of Commerce had enough capital to expand, it wouldn't be too late to establish a branch in hallucinatory Immortal City. In fact, most sects and chambers of commerce did this. Sometimes, moving too fast might not be a good thing. What does father-in-law think? Since he said so, what else could Mu Bing say? He nodded awkwardly. He was too embarrassed to face his daughter here, so he squeezed out a smile and said, I have something to do at home, so I'll go back first. Wu Xiong could feel Mu Bing's awkwardness and also felt a little embarrassed. After all, this was caused by him. He immediately stretched out his hand and said with a smile, I'll see you off, father-in-law. Mu Tianjiao bit her lips as she watched the two men leave. Tears flowed uncontrollably from her eyes. She never thought that something she held so firmly would be so disdainful in her father's eyes, as if he could abandon it at any time. Outside the External Affairs Grand Commander's residence, one could see the undulating mountains and the beautiful scenery. Wu Xiong, who had sent Mu Bing to the edge of the cliff, looked at the ashen-faced Mu Bing and said with a faint smile, We're all family. Father-in-law, please don't take Madam's words to heart. You should know that she has no ill intentions towards you. Mu Bing's lips moved. After a moment of hesitation, he said, It's not like that. The reason why Tianjiao is so angry is that Yu Qianqiu is to blame. Yu Qianqiu? Wu Xiong was stunned. For a moment, he couldn't figure out why this matter had something to do with Yu Qianqiu. He asked in surprise, What does it have to do with Yu Qianqiu? She was fine before. It was only because she heard about Yu Qianqiu's shameless actions in the mystic Immortal City that she became unhappy after I said a few words about Yu Qianqiu. That's why she lost her temper and wanted me, her father, to leave. Sigh. Mu Bing's eyes flickered. Wu Xiong's gaze instantly turned cold. He looked at Mu Bing and said indifferently, What do you mean by this? Please don't misunderstand, Grand Commander. It's not what you think. Mu Bing waved his hand. He naturally wouldn't say that he wanted to use someone else to do his dirty work. He sighed and explained, Grand Commander, you might not know this, but when Yu Qianqiu first came to my Four Links Chamber of Commerce, he once pursued Tianjiao. I could tell at a glance that he wasn't a good person, so I firmly opposed him. Tianjiao also didn't take a liking to him, but I couldn't stand that guy's relentless pestering, so I might have been tempted. Fortunately, I noticed that something was wrong in time and drove that kid away. However, that kid couldn't forget my Tianjiao. Later, when the Grand Commander proposed to you, that kid was afraid of the Grand Commander's prestige and gave up. However, I never imagined that you would invite him on the day of your wedding. That's why I was so unhappy at the time and was a little rude to him. A suppressed murderous aura faintly circulated around Wu Xiong's body. How many men could tolerate another man coveting their beloved woman? His eyes flickered as he recalled Mu Tianjiao's first night. He felt that she hadn't done anything wrong to him, so his killing intent gradually retracted. Wu Xiong said indifferently, Father-in-law, let's not mention the past. Otherwise, it won't be good for anyone. Not to mention, I don't want to pursue the past. Mu Bing was slightly surprised. He didn't think that Wu Xiong would be so magnanimous. However, when he recalled the killing intent Wu Xiong emitted earlier, he regained his confidence and said, But I can't stand to see such an ambiguous matter. That kid's mouth is famous for being foul. I'm afraid that he will say something that will affect Tianjiao's reputation. As a parent, how can I tolerate such a thing happening? If there are any signs, I must find a way to put an end to it. Wu Xiong was startled and suspiciously asked, You want to kill him? Mu Bing firmly nodded. Wu Xiong immediately frowned and said, Father-in-law, don't be reckless. He received the Immortal Emperor's decree to carry out his mission. If something happens to him, it's not something you or I can bear. But I heard that he wants to go to the netherworld. Mu Bing gloomily looked at Wu Xiong and said word by word, If something happens to him in the netherworld, what does it have to do with you and me? Wu Xiong looked at Mu Bing in surprise. He didn't expect Mu Bing to be so scheming. It seemed that he had underestimated Mu Bing. Wu Xiong originally wanted to persuade him to let go, but for some reason, he thought of the golden statues in his bedroom. It was a gift from Yu Qianzhou to congratulate him on his wedding. It had always been placed on Mu Tianjiao's dressing table with the words, "Forever and Earth," carved on it. Occasionally, he would see Mu Tianjiao staring at the golden statue in a daze. When he asked her why, she said that she hoped the two of them could be as eternal as the words carved on the statue. However, at this moment, he couldn't help but have a big question mark in his heart. Was there no other reason? For a moment, he felt a stabbing pain in his heart. Wu Xiong slowly said, "Father-in-law, you should give up. He has Tsungyin Xian by his side to protect him. Right now, Tsungyin Xian's cultivation has reached the mid-stage of the Immortal Emperor stage. He has also mastered the Heartless Palace's famous 3 swords as one sword drawing form. Not to mention father-in-law, even I am not his match." Although Wu Xiong's words were meant to dissuade him, Mu Bing's 7 apertures were miraculously smooth today. Their hearts were connected, and he could actually hear the softness in Wu Xiong's tone. Therefore, it could be said that sometimes, the power of hatred was extraordinary and could make people stronger. Mu Bing sneered and said, "Tsungyin Xian has a grudge with him for killing his grandson. I don't believe that Tsungyin Xian can protect him at all times without any complaints. Moreover, the netherworld is chaotic. Anything can happen. If something happens to Yu Qianzhou, what can Tsungyin Xian do?" Hearing this, Wu Xiong was even more surprised. He couldn't help but size up Mu Bing again. How could a person with such schemes and methods manage the 4 links Chamber of Commerce to such a state? He originally wanted to test Mu Bing to see how capable he was. If he really had the ability, there was no harm in letting him try. If he didn't, then it was better to let him give up on the idea as soon as possible to avoid unnecessary trouble. However, he didn't expect Mu Bing to have some tricks up his sleeve. Wu Xiong still wanted to test him, so he slowly shook his head and said, "Even if Tsungyin Xian has times of carelessness, that guy is also a capable person. I'm sure father-in-law has heard of the battle at the Life and Death Mound. I'm afraid ordinary people are not his match." The meaning behind his words was very clear. He was saying that Mu Bing was not Yu Qianzhou's match. "It's fine that I'm not his match. Humans die for wealth and birds die for food. I'm sure there are many people who are his match." Mu Bing revealed an unfathomable smile, implicitly pointing out that he would use others to deal with Yu Qianzhou. Wu Xiong was afraid that if Mu Bing used force, he would be implicated. However, seeing that Mu Bing's thoughts were so clear that he wouldn't personally take action, Wu Xiong immediately felt relieved. He faintly smiled and said, "It seems that father-in-law has made up his mind to go to the netherworld. However, the netherworld is chaotic, and this son-in-law is very worried about father-in-law's safety." Fortunately, when this son-in-law was handling the external affairs of the Immortal Palace, I had some friendly relations with some of the commanders of the netherworld's Dark Nether Army. If father-in-law encounters any trouble, there is no harm in asking for help from the Dark Nether Army. Tell them that you are my father-in-law. I'm sure they will give me some face. Mu Bing was overjoyed. His 4 links Chamber of Commerce had done business in the netherworld, so he naturally knew of the Dark Nether Army's illustrious reputation in the netherworld. With the Dark Nether Army's help, even if Yu Qianzhou was protected by Tsungyin Xian, killing him would be a piece of cake. His confidence immediately soared as he cupped his hands and said, "The great commander is very busy. It's rare for you to have a rest, so I won't disturb you any longer. Farewell." Chapter 994. The reason why he spent so much effort to nag in front of Wu Xiong was to get Wu Xiong to agree, but the most important reason was to gain Wu Xiong's support. No matter how stupid he was, he knew that Wu Xiong had been the external affairs commander of the Immortal Palace for so many years. It was impossible that he didn't have any power in the netherworld that he could borrow. If that was the case, then Wu Xiong wouldn't have held this position for so many years. It could also be described as incompetent. How could the Immortal Emperor let an incompetent person be the external affairs commander of the Immortal Palace? Father-in-law, have a safe trip. I won't see you off. Wu Xiong cupped his fists and bowed slightly. He watched Mu Bing leave with a sneer on his face. With his intelligence, how could he not know that Mu Bing wanted to borrow his power? Since Mu Bing was in such a hurry, he would fulfill his wish. In any case, he only gave some verbal help and didn't show any evidence. As for the Onyx army, if anything happened, he wouldn't be implicated. Moreover, judging from Mu Bing's words and actions just now, it was obvious that he was prepared. Perhaps he could really kill Yu Qianqiu. However, what Wu Xiong didn't know was that in the world of Yu Qianqiu's previous life, there was an idiom called armchair strategists. When one had nothing to do, one could boast and speak eloquently. However, when it came to real action, it was far from the case. If Mu Tianjiao had been present just now, she would have desperately tried to stop her father from doing that because she knew her father too well. How could she not know what her father was capable of? She never thought that her father could be a match for Yu Qianqiu, so she repeatedly advised him not to provoke Yu Qianqiu, but Wu Xiong wasn't a fool. He let Mu Bing do whatever he wanted because he had other intentions. The real reason was that Mu Bing had just said something about Mu Tianjiao and Yu Qianqiu. Regardless of how Yu Qianqiu was, Wu Xiong could see that this father-in-law of his could even insult the reputation of his only daughter, let alone him, his son-in-law. One could imagine what he wouldn't do in the future. At this rate, he would be implicated sooner or later. Then let him kill Yu Qianqiu. It would be best if they could kill Yu Qianqiu. If Mu Tianjiao really had a Yu Qianqiu in her heart, it would cut off Mu Tianjiao's yearning. For someone who loved her, it was a good thing. At the same time, Mu Tianjiao would surely hate her father because of this. Then, he could justifiably distance himself from Mu Bing, so as not to implicate himself in the future, and not to cause a rift between him and Mu Tianjiao. It could be said to be killing two birds with one stone. If Mu Bing failed to kill Yu Qianqiu and was killed by Yu Qianqiu instead, it would be a good thing for him. Now that Mu Bing was dead, this inconvenient burden was completely gone. Naturally, Mu Tianjiao would also completely cut off her thoughts of Yu Qianqiu. One could imagine how she would treat the person who killed her father. Similarly, it was killing two birds with one stone. In short, no matter who died, it would be a good thing for him, so Wu Xiong was naturally happy to do it. Poor Mu Bing. Little did he know that this little trick of his was not even worth mentioning in the eyes of some people. He was just digging a pit that would harm others and himself. Whether or not he could harm others was another matter, but he was definitely going to harm himself. On the rapidly flying shuttle, Yu Qianqiu sat at the back of the shuttle with his legs crossed. He leaned on the side of the shuttle with one hand supporting his head and looked at the scenery. It had already been 2 days. Qian Yun Xian, who was silently standing at the front of the flying shuttle, had his back facing him. The two of them had almost never communicated. Only Yu Qianqiu would tease him from time to time. Unfortunately, the other party simply ignored him. Drowsily, Yu Qianqiu felt the red light piercing his eyes. He opened his eyes slightly and saw that it was another rising sun. It was the 4th day since he left the psychedelic Immortal city. In front of him, Qian Yun Xian's imposing figure blocked most of the piercing sunlight. Yu Qianqiu could not help but sigh at his foresight. Fortunately, he was not the one driving the flying shuttle. Just as he was letting his imagination run wild, the front end of the flying shuttle suddenly pressed down and slammed diagonally towards the ground. With the back of the shuttle tilted up, Yu Qianqiu grabbed the sides of the flying shuttle. He could see the ground getting closer and closer to him. He immediately cried out in alarm, "What are you trying to do, Qian Yun Xian?" Like a nail, Qian Yun Xian, who was standing firmly at the front of the flying shuttle, descended against the wind. He looked back and snorted coldly, "Cowardly rat." Then, the flying shuttle abruptly returned to normal and flew almost close to the ground. Finally, it slowly stopped in front of a magnificent palace built against a mountain. Bang! The moment the flying shuttle landed on the ground, Qian Yun Xian had already floated out and landed lightly on the steps of the palace's entrance. Yu Qianqiu dashed out as if he was running for his life. Then, he took the flying shuttle in his hand and checked it. After confirming that it was not damaged, he put it away. Just as he was about to scold Xian Yun Xian, he saw two golden-robed guards at the entrance of the palace. He immediately looked around and found that it was the entrance to the netherworld that everyone had mentioned. Only then did he know why Xian Yun Xian had stopped. Damn it! Why didn't you say anything? Yu Qianzhou cursed under his breath. In his heart, he was also amazed at the vastness of the immortal world. With Qian Yun Xian's cultivation, it took him more than 3 days to fly from the psychedelic immortal city to here. If it was him, who knew how many days it would take to fly? This was the difference in cultivation. After looking around, he swayed towards a small hill on the side. Just as he reached the top of the hill, he heard Xian Yun Xian's voice behind him. Where are you going now? To pee. Yu Qianzhou turned back and roared. Just as he lifted his robe, he found that there was a call in front of him that seemed to be more hidden. He turned back and roared again, don't peek. Xian Yun Xian's face immediately darkened. He had no intention of peeking at all. After turning into the call, Yu Qianzhou looked around. After confirming that there was no one, he took out a silver ball and pressed it into the mountain wall. This was mainly to shorten the time it would take to reach the entrance to the netherworld. Then, he lifted up his long robe and fired a shot to deceive others. After tying his belt, he swayed back to the entrance of the palace. Xian Yun Xian looked at him coldly and sneered, why don't you take a dump again? Yu Qianzhou shrugged disapprovingly, this thing doesn't care about travel together. The place I just went is very hidden. If you want to take me there, I'll wait for you. Xian Yun Xian's lips moved, but he forcefully held back and did not say anything. He realized that he was not a match for Yu Qianzhou in a quarrel. The main thing was that he was not as shameless as Yu Qianzhou. The two golden-robed guards looked at each other. They had never heard anyone talk about taking a dump here. It was simply unbearable. One of them immediately shouted, this is the entrance to the netherworld. Those with the token can enter. Those without the token are not allowed to make a ruckus here. Leave quickly. Yu Qianzhou immediately took out his netherworld passage token and waved it in front of the ash cloud messenger in a threatening manner. It was as if he was saying, did you hear that? Those without the token are not allowed to make a ruckus here. I can make a ruckus with the token. If you don't have it, you better shut up obediently. Xian Yun Xian's face darkened again. Although their heartless palace had the netherworld token, it had always been used by groups. They would rarely give it to a single person, unless there was something important. He immediately said in a deep voice, if you want to go in alone without me, this old man will be more than happy to do so. Yu Qianzhou rolled his eyes and snorted coldly, as if saying, in your dreams. Then, he walked up to the guards and handed over the token for them to check. After confirming it, the guards let the two of them in. The two of them walked in one after the other. There was nothing in the hall. The four walls were chiseled with knives and axes, and there was only a long tunnel. The tunnel was abnormally dark, and it was frighteningly quiet. Only the sound of their footsteps could be heard. At the end of the tunnel, there was a ball of black light spinning tirelessly. It was unknown how many years it had been spinning here. You go in first. Yu Qianzhou moved to the side. After all, he had never been to the netherworld, so he was more or less unsure. Xian Yun Xian snorted coldly and disappeared into the spinning black light in a flash. Yu Qianzhou hesitated for a long time, but he finally plucked up his courage and jumped in. The moment he entered the spinning black light, colorful flowing lights appeared in front of him. An unknown gravitational force sucked him in, and when there was a flash of light, he was spat out. The sky was dark, and there was no light from the sun or the moon. It was like the moment when twilight was about to turn into night. This was the first thing that Yu Qianzhou felt when he landed and saw this world. However, before he could see anything else, Yu Qianzhou. Xian Yun Xian's angry roar rang out. Yu Qianzhou looked over and saw over a dozen black-armored, knife-wielding soldiers surrounding Greycloud Xian. Greycloud Xian was looking at Yu Qianzhou as if he wanted to swallow him alive. Damn it! Could it be that the netherworld was in such chaos? It really lived up to its reputation. Before he could figure out what was going on, a stocky armored general appeared in front of him. He held a large blade that looked like a green dragon crescent moon blade and shouted, "Incomer, show me your token of passage to the netherworld." Yu Qianzhou glanced at the besieged Sangyun Xian and cautiously took out his netherworld passage medallion. While the other side was checking the medallion, Yu Qianzhou pointed at Sangyun Xian and carefully asked, "General, what crime did he commit?" After the armored general verified that there was nothing wrong with the token, he returned it to Yu Qianzhou and asked, "He's with you?" Yu Qianzhou's eyes flickered. He could not figure out the situation, nor did he know what kind of crime Qianyun Xian had committed. If he was with him, would he be implicated? As soon as he hesitated, Qianyun Xian panicked and roared, "Yu Qianzhou, what do you think you're doing?" Yu Qianzhou looked at the situation around him. There weren't many people here, so he guessed that these people might not be a match for Qianyun Xian. He replied weakly, "He's with me." "Is there a problem?" The armored general immediately rolled his eyes and snapped, "No problem, all of you scram." The dozen or so saber-wielding soldiers surrounding Greycloud Xian also flashed back. Yu Qianzhou walked up to Greycloud Xian, who was glaring at him with fire in his eyes, and asked suspiciously, "What did you do? You made such a big fuss and almost implicated me. Do you really not know?" Qianyun Xian's eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. "I just came in. How would I know what you did?" Yu Qianzhou was confused. He did not know that after he let Qianyun Xian come in first, he had been too careful and hesitated a little too long at the entrance to the immortal world. As soon as Qianyun Xian arrived in the netherworld, the guards naturally wanted to see his netherworld token, but he did not have it. He could only say that the token was with the person behind him and would come in soon. But what made him panic was that after waiting for a long time, Yu Qianzhou still didn't come in. He immediately suspected that he had been tricked by Yu Qianzhou. The guards waited for a long time and did not see anyone come in. They naturally suspected that he was a trespasser and immediately surrounded him. Fortunately, the guards realized that Qianyun Xian's cultivation was very high. It was probably not something they could handle, so they didn't make a move. Otherwise, they would have captured Qianyun Xian first. It was also at this critical moment that the late Yu Qianzhou finally came. This was what happened. Qianyun Xian saw that he did not look like he was lying. After a bit of analysis, he felt that he was not lying. If he really wanted to harm him, he would not have come in. Even if he came in, he could have denied not knowing him and caused a conflict between him and the guards. He paused and said, "This should be your first time in the netherworld, right?" Yu Qianzhou's brain was still somewhat good. After hearing his question and looking at the guards at the entrance, he pondered for a bit and understood what was going on. However, he did not regret not taking the opportunity to trick Qianyun Xian, because it was useless now. With Qianyun Xian's ability, if he was forced into a corner, he could easily escape back to the immortal world. The exit was right in front of him, and the guards here should not be able to stop him. Yu Qianzhou replied with a non-committal "n", indicating that it was indeed his first time in the netherworld. Then, he began to look around. A huge stone tablet at the side, diagonally facing the exit of the netherworld, attracted his attention. Anyone who entered the netherworld from the immortal world would probably be able to see the inscription on it. The vast netherworld, a world of its own. Birth, old age, sickness, and death. The ultimate place, the netherworld. 20 large, blood-red words were forcefully engraved on the huge black stone tablet. The words exuded an ancient aura, making people have the urge to kneel and worship them. Yu Qianzhou's gaze turned towards the endless darkness. This place was not completely dark. There was a hint of a green haze to it. It felt like there was some light, but he couldn't tell where the light was. It was like the moment when dusk turned to night, or when the night was about to break. Everything was hazy. The guards at the entrance of the netherworld looked at the two fellows who were unwilling to leave. From time to time, they would look at their leader, who was the guy who had just checked Yu Qianzhou's pass. Logically speaking, at this time, the leader should have shouted, "Since you have the pass, you are not allowed to stay." Leave immediately. But the strange thing was that the leader looked to the side with his hands behind his back, as if he had not seen anything. Chapter 995. This was called smart people doing smart things, or being perceptive. At first, the armored general only realized that he couldn't see through Zhu Qianzhou's cultivation. Later, when Yu Qianzhou came in, he didn't pay much attention at first, because Yu Qianzhou's weak response made him look down on him a little. However, when he realized that he also couldn't see through Yu Qianzhou's cultivation, he was shocked. Why did two Immortal Emperor-level experts come from the Immortal world all of a sudden? The Underworld's cultivation was divided into 4 levels: Underworld Knight, Underworld Sage, Underworld Venerable, and Underworld Emperor, corresponding to the Immortal world's Minor Immortal, Exalted Immortal, Great Immortal, and Immortal Emperor levels. The armored general's cultivation wasn't low, otherwise, he wouldn't have been sent to guard the Underworld's entrance. After all, he was a late-stage Underworld Venerable, equivalent to a late-stage Great Immortal. However, since he couldn't see through their cultivation, these two were at least early-stage Immortal Emperor experts. The reason he was shocked wasn't because he was afraid of Zhu Qianzhou Xian, but from Zhu Qianzhou Xian's actions at the beginning, he was clearly wary of the Underworld. However, the guy who came later was different. His cultivation was so high, why did he pretend to be weak? Based on his many years of experience, people who pretended to be weak were often the easiest to ignore, and often the scariest. So, seeing that the two didn't leave, he didn't dare to say anything. If he angered them, he wouldn't be able to handle it. Anyway, they came in with a token and didn't break any rules. So, he turned around and pretended he didn't see anything, displaying the style of an old fox who was good to everyone. So this is the Underworld. Yu Qianzhou muttered softly. It was more or less different from what he imagined. He looked around and didn't know where to go. What do you want to do in the Underworld? Zhu Qianzhou finally couldn't help but ask the question in his heart. Yu Qianzhou glanced at him and thought that it was a good idea to keep an expert by his side. After all, he knew nothing about the Netherworld and was not in a hurry to get rid of him. He shook his head and sighed, I dare not disobey the Celestial Emperor's decree. Oh right, your heartless palace should have people doing business in the Netherworld, right? Yes. Seeing that his tone had suddenly become gentle, Zhangyan Xian recalled Meihe's words before he came, and immediately became vigilant. What do you want? We can't run around aimlessly. Naturally, he had to gather some information first. As the chief high priest of Heartless Palace, you should be able to contact them, right? Yu Qianzhou asked seriously. In fact, his purpose was very simple. He came here to find Bai Changchun. To be more precise, he wanted to know whether Bai Changchun was dead or alive. Otherwise, he would feel very uncomfortable worrying about him every day. It was said that Bai Changchun had fought with the Emperor of the Underworld and fled into the boundless and mysterious land of darkness after his defeat. They had to find out which direction Bai Changchun had fled to. Otherwise, how would they find him? The guards at the entrance of the Underworld shivered slightly, especially the armored general. He thought to himself, no wonder both of their cultivations are so high. One is here on the decree of the Immortal Emperor, the other is the chief high priest of the number 1 sect in the Immortal world. But why did they come to the Underworld? What do you want to find out? Zhangyan Xian asked suspiciously. Nothing much. Yu Qianzhou didn't think much of it. I just want to know the general situation of the Underworld so that I can travel around and gain experience. Only with enough experience can I compose a good song. He wanted to say that he wanted to find Bai Changchun, but he couldn't say it out loud. First of all, it would scare Zhangyan Xian, and this was the territory of the Emperor of the Underworld. If he revealed it, wouldn't he be immediately targeted by the Emperor of the Underworld? Zhangyan Xian pondered for a moment and didn't want to say anything. However, this was the Underworld after all, and it was very chaotic with various hegemons. This was the brat's first time here, so he didn't know anything. If he ran around with this brat and ended up in the lair of some powerful expert, then he would also be out of luck. After a moment of hesitation, he slowly said, "Follow me." Then, He took out his own flying shuttle and flashed onto it. Yu Qianqiu immediately flashed onto it as well. This time, there was no need to waste his breath on scheming. Sungyan Xian took the initiative to act as a guide and pilot the flying shuttle. Although he wasn't familiar with the underworld, he had been here before. Compared to a rookie like Yu Qianqiu, he was much more familiar with it. He was mainly concerned about his own safety. He was afraid that Yu Qianqiu would take him to some lair. The flying shuttle sped northwest in the darkness. In fact, even Yu Qianqiu couldn't tell if they were going northwest or not. There were no sun, moon, or stars here, so there was no way to tell which direction they were going. However, when they exited the entrance of the underworld, they were facing forward. Then, according to the common sense of up north, down south, left, west, right, east, who knew which direction they were flying in? Yu Qianqiu even suspected that the people of the underworld didn't have any direction at all. Although the speed of the flying shuttle was very fast, it was obviously much slower than when they were flying in the immortal world. Sungyan Xian stood at the front, maintaining a high degree of vigilance. His robe fluttered in the night, making him look extraordinary. In particular, his hands were hidden in his sleeves. Yu Qianqiu didn't doubt that if they encountered any unexpected situation, the hands hidden in his sleeves could pull out the Heartless Palace's three swords drawing technique at any time. It would definitely be earth-shattering. Yu Qianqiu kept looking around. The scenery of the underworld was not just a little worse than the immortal world. The main reason was that there was no scenery to see. Everywhere was dim and gloomy. From time to time, he would see streams of light dancing in the air. He didn't know what they were, but it was slightly mysterious. Occasionally, he could see the shadow of a huge black shadow flashing by. Judging by the shape, it should be the mountains of the underworld. I say, High Consecrator Tsangyan, where are you taking me? Yu Qianqiu had lost count of the number of times he had asked this question. The annoyed ash-gray cloud Xian finally spat out 4 words, Twilight City. Twilight City? Yu Qianqiu was slightly stunned. He felt that he had heard this name before, but he couldn't remember when he heard it. Normally, if he heard such a rare name in the immortal world, he would definitely remember who said it. Could it be an impression from his previous life? In his previous life, the underworld, which was the netherworld, had Twilight City. What kind of place is Twilight City? Is it a city? Why is it called Twilight City? He asked a lot of questions in one breath. Sungyan Xian understood that if he didn't answer, this guy would continue to be annoyed. He looked around vigilantly and casually explained, no one knows why it is called Twilight City, at least I don't know. Maybe someone knew in the past. Anyway, this name has existed for a long time. It is a city, and no one knows when it has existed. In short, many things in the underworld are too old to be judged by common sense. It is now a place for trade between the immortal world and the underworld. It is said that when the demon world was not sealed, the cultivators of the 3 realms would trade here. A place for trade between the immortal world and the underworld? Yu Qianqiu was startled. He searched his mind but had no memory of it. He couldn't help but wonder, since it is a place for trade between the immortal world and the underworld, why have I never heard of it in the immortal world? Sungyan Xian sneered, the rules of the underworld do not allow the people of the underworld to trade with the people of the immortal world. However, there are some things that both sides need, so the underworld palace turns a blind eye to it. However, no one would be stupid enough to openly provoke the underworld palace. If not stupid, then what is? What's more, Twilight City is not a place that ordinary immortal world sects can reach. It's not surprising that you don't know about it. If you don't ask, no one will talk about it. Sure enough, his foundation was shallow. He didn't know how many things he didn't know. Yu Qianqiu fell into silence for a while. Obviously, ordinary immortal world sects couldn't reach it because they would encounter many dangers on the way. With the strength of those small sects, it was indeed difficult to reach it safely. After a pause, he asked, with your current speed, how long will it take to reach Twilight City from the entrance to the underworld? If it goes well. At least half a month. Sungin Xian said indifferently. Yu Qianqiu immediately let out a cold breath. The territory of the underworld was really wide. With Sungin Xian's speed, what kind of concept would it take half a month to fly? And this was under the condition that everything went well. What if it didn't? Just as he thought that things weren't going well, things were about to happen, the shuttle suddenly came to an abrupt stop, the powerful inertia throwing him out. Like a bolt of lightning, Ashiro Yun Xian grabbed his ankle, pulled him back, and threw him back into the cabin. Yu Qianqiu was immediately scared and shouted, "What do you want now?" "Shut up." Sungin Xian shouted in a low voice, and his eyes quickly swept around. Yu Qianqiu immediately found that there was something wrong with his expression. He also looked around and found that there was a faint gray fog in the darkness. If he didn't look carefully, he wouldn't have noticed it. He immediately asked carefully, "What's wrong? Is there something wrong? We have been in this gray fog for several hours, and we are trapped by the formation." Sungin Xian pointed to the shadowy peaks around them, but when he said this, his expression was unusually calm, and his eyes were full of strong confidence. Suddenly, Yu Qianqiu felt a lot more relieved. He suddenly said indifferently to the void, "I don't know which friend is playing a joke here. This Sungin Xian has accidentally disturbed this place. I hope this friend will be magnanimous and let us go. This Sungin Xian will be very grateful." Yu Qianqiu was not afraid. He could go back at any time. While he was looking around curiously, he suddenly heard laughter coming from all directions. He couldn't tell whether it was a man's voice or a woman's voice. It seemed to be far and close, and from time to time, it gave people the feeling that it was lying next to your ear and laughing. It was very strange. Yu Qianqiu hated people who played tricks in front of him the most. He immediately shouted, "Which old bastard dares to play tricks in front of Grandpa? Do you want to die?" Chapter 996. Sungin Xian was speechless. He tilted his head and looked over. You didn't even know whether the enemy was strong or weak, and you already started scolding him. If it was an expert that you couldn't afford to offend, you wouldn't even have the chance to regret it. However, Yu Qianqiu politely followed the routine and ignored him. Yu Qianqiu's strange laughter was suddenly cut off. He couldn't help but look at Yu Qianqiu again, guessing that he had been scolded to stop. Sungin Xian couldn't help but feel a little depressed. It seemed that this guy was always arrogant and didn't fear anyone, not just him. But if he didn't restrain himself in the netherworld, he would be implicated and killed by this guy sooner or later. "Ignorant junior, how dare you speak such arrogant words? In a moment, this old man will definitely eat you up until not even your bones are left." The ethereal and traceless voice once again sounded from all directions. It seemed to be near yet far, and sometimes it seemed to be right beside one's ear. It's useless to talk nicely to this kind of pretentious person. He's just asking for a scolding. Look, he's exposed. What an old guy. Yu Qianqiu looked around and turned to ask Sungin Xian, "With your ability, it shouldn't be a problem to take care of him, right? I didn't even see him, how would I know if there's a problem?" Sungin Xian's face twitched. This kind of person was really not on the same level as him. Seeing that he didn't say anything, Yu Qianqiu didn't stand on ceremony. He took a step forward, stepped on the side of the ship, and waved his hand at the night sky, shouting, "Old bastard, I'm warning you, the person next to me is a top expert, Sungin Xian, the chief consecrator of the #1 sect in the celestial world, Heartless Palace. If you know what's good for you, hurry up and give way, or he won't be polite to you." He had never seen such a shameless person. Just as Greycloud Xian glared at him, the faintly discernible voice laughed and said, "I've heard of the Celestial Realm's Heartless Palace's sect master Wang Qing, but I've never heard of this or that. But even if the sect master of the Heartless Palace, Wang Qing, is here, so what? This is the Netherworld, it's not the place for people from the celestial world to be arrogant." Yu Qianqiu immediately pointed around and shook his head at Sungin Xian. "This old thing is obviously looking down on you. In fact, Qingyan Xian had already used his perception to scan the surroundings during this period of time. His eyes flickered as he looked around and said, I have no enmity with Sir and do not wish to have any conflict with Sir. I hope that Sir will stop here, all right? Yu Qianzhou's spirit was instantly lifted. He could hear a hint of an ultimatum in his words. It seemed like the show was about to start. Stop. The faintly discernible voice giggled. What a joke. I haven't even made a move. You're the ones who barged into my mirage, Mr. Ray. You can't even break out of my mirage, Mr. Ray, so what qualifications do you have to fight with me? Sunyan Xian snorted coldly. Just like Yu Qianzhou, he stepped on the railing with one foot, stared down at Ji Hao, and said in a bland tone, You are hiding in the vast Styx River, so you must be a member of the Styx River waterkind. Do you think that I can't do anything to you just because you're hiding in the Netherworld River? Styx River? Yu Qianzhou was stunned. He quickly craned his neck to look around. He could vaguely see an outline that was as wide as a black belt extending to both ends of the land. He couldn't see the end of it either. This should be the Styx River that Sunyan Xian had mentioned. The other party paused. Obviously, he was surprised that Sunyan Xian could discover his hiding place. Then, he giggled and said, I won't argue with you. We'll talk after you break my mirage, Mr. Ray. If you can't, just wait for death. Child's play. I'll naturally break it after I kill you. Sunyan Xian stared down without turning his head. He said to Yu Qianzhou, wait for me here. We'll continue our journey after I get rid of this demon. His words were filled with great confidence in his own strength. Yes, yes, yes. Yu Qianzhou nodded repeatedly. Do whatever you want. I can take care of myself. Sunyan Xian stomped his feet lightly and floated in the air. His cold gaze swept across the land below. With a swoosh, he turned into a blue stream of light and charged down. Yu Qianzhou hurriedly controlled the flying shuttle. He knelt at the bow of the ship and stuck out his butt to look at the commotion below. Just as the stream of light was about to collide with the wide river below, Sunyan Xian's shout was suddenly heard. Absolute heaven. Yu Qianzhou suddenly recalled that Wei Chuanxiu had told him that day. The Passionless Palace's sword-drawing technique had a total of 5 forms. The first form was called Absolute Heaven, the second form was called Absolute Earth, the third form was called Heartless, the fourth form was called 2 Swords as One, and the fifth form was called 3 Swords as One. Sunyan Xian had already mastered all 5 forms of the sword-drawing technique. Then, this Absolute Heaven should be the first form of the Passionless Palace's sword-drawing technique. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, a dazzling light suddenly illuminated the world. Although it was shrouded in a thin layer of fog, the surrounding situation could be seen clearly in an instant. The surging waves of the river reflected the dazzling light. In the sky, the sword ray that was like a heavenly dragon clashed violently with the reflection in the river. Boom! The tranquil night was broken. A huge wave instantly spread out from the wide Netherworld River, rumbling and surging in all directions. The center of the wave exploded into a splash of white water that was hundreds of meters high, charging straight at the flying shuttle above. F***CK. Yu Qianzhou let out a strange cry. He used the water art and slapped out with his palm. The violent wave of water immediately scattered in all directions, brushing past the flying shuttle and shooting even higher. Water was soft and could dissipate force. To be able to cause such a high wave, it was clear how powerful Sunyan Xian's attack was. Then, Yu Qianzhou saw with his own eyes that the Netherworld River, which was nearly a kilometer wide, was almost cut off by Sunyan Xian's sword. He could see the riverbed. Meanwhile, Sunyan Xian's sword-drawing technique did not dissipate. It directly struck a huge mound of soil on the riverbed. Ah! A scream rang out. The Netherworld River, which had been cut off, was instantly submerged together with Sunyan Xian. The dazzling light that was like a flash in the pan suddenly disappeared. There was a throbbing in the surrounding air. Yu Qianzhou looked around vigilantly. He saw that a large area of hazy gray fog was sizzling away and gathering in the Netherworld River below. It was as if there was a huge range hood installed in the Netherworld River. It seemed like the mirage mist array had been broken. Yu Qianqiu immediately clicked his tongue. He thought to himself that Sungyin Xian was indeed an immortal emperor-level expert. He had solved the problem with a single attack. It was clean and efficient. He wondered if Sungyin Xian had killed that demon. As he was pondering, he suddenly heard a soft, dong sound behind him. He turned around and saw a large hand quickly grabbing his neck. Yu Qianqiu was shocked. He slapped back with his hand almost without hesitation. A group of purple meteors burst out and smashed the hand that was grabbing him into pieces on the spot. Ah! The person screamed, but he reacted quickly. The moment his hand was crippled, he teleported hundreds of meters away before the group of flying swords could hit him. He turned around and ran. At that moment, a blue stream of light rushed out of the water with a boom. It shot out diagonally and cut off the person's escape route. It was Sungyin Xian. A thick gray fog suddenly burst out from the figure's body to obscure the eyes and ears of others. In an instant, it wrapped around Gray Cloud Xian and shot out from the gray fog, rushing towards the Netherworld River below. As a bystander, Yu Qianqiu saw everything clearly. He immediately roared angrily, "B*****, you dare to sneak attack me? Don't run." The group of purple swords in the air chased after him. He didn't care about anything else. He threw down the flying shuttle and teleported to chase after him. It was more important to kill him first. He didn't know what kind of magical power that the thick gray fog had. It actually trapped Sungyin Xian for a while. After Sungyin Xian rushed out of the fog, he happened to see the flying shuttle in the air lose its momentum and fall. He waved his hand and kept the flying shuttle. His gaze suddenly looked down. Just as the person who was fleeing in panic entered the water, close to 100 purple flying swords shot into the water like cannons. Yu Qianqiu, who was in hot pursuit, shouted angrily, trying to run. As he gave chase, he fiercely sent out a palm strike. The surging Netherworld River below instantly became sparkling and translucent. Sungyin Xian's pupils shrank. He couldn't help but let out a cold breath. Although he had heard of the legend of Yu Qianqiu freezing the life and death mound in illusory Immortal City, it wasn't as shocking as seeing it with his own eyes. A river that was close to 1,000 meters wide was instantly frozen. "Great Immortal, please spare me. Great Immortal, please spare me. I know my mistake, I know my mistake." A sorrowful voice came from the glacier below. Yu Qianqiu landed on the ice. He looked down with a sinister gaze. He seemed to be considering whether or not to kill. Sungyin Xian kept the sword in his hand and landed on the ice. He was speechless when he saw the crystal-clear situation below. The frozen person was surrounded by hundreds of purple flying swords. Some of the flying swords even stabbed into his body. If Yu Qianqiu hadn't stopped in time, that person would have been stabbed into a hedgehog. That person was actually depressed. He couldn't understand why the river suddenly froze. He was surrounded by hundreds of flying swords in just a short while. If it was an ordinary flying sword, he would not be afraid. However, he had already experienced these flying swords. Not only were they incomparably sharp, they seemed to be his natural nemesis. His cultivation was like nothing in front of them. Once he got close, he could feel a strong sense of suppression. Without a doubt, they could easily beat him into a cork. He had no way of blocking them. This person is a river clam that has cultivated successfully. His cultivation has reached the early stage of Underworld Venerable. It is equivalent to the early stage Great Immortal in the Immortal world. Sungyin Xian said indifferently. He had clearly seen the person's true form in the river. River clam? Early stage Underworld Venerable? Yu Qianqiu raised his eyebrows. He seemed to understand something. He took a few steps forward. The ice under his feet melted and he quickly sank down. He landed in front of the pitiful man who was trapped and looked him up and down. The man was dark and skinny, and he didn't look old. His eyes were filled with fear and his pupils were spinning around. Other than the wounds caused by his flying swords, there were a few long bloody wounds. It was obvious that he was injured by Enrich. Yu Qianqiu snorted coldly. He shook his sleeve and a small green bead appeared in his hand. He held it between two fingers and sent it to the person's mouth. He shouted, "Swallow it if you don't want to die." Chapter 997. It was already scary enough to be stabbed by so many flying swords. Now, he was forced to eat this strange thing. The person looked at the thing beside his mouth and said in fear, What is this?" He could already feel that this pearl had an aura similar to that of the flying swords that could suppress him. If he ate it, he would die. "You don't look like you want to eat it?" Yu Qianqiu asked sinisterly. Close to 100 purple flying swords suddenly moved closer by an inch. The person immediately cried out, "I'll eat it, I'll eat it." His mouth was wide open. Yu Qianqiu flicked his finger, and the green pearl directly burrowed into the person's throat. The person coughed and looked at him in fear. Yu Qianqiu smiled faintly and said, "That's right. Don't ever think about forcing him out, and don't ever think about escaping. Otherwise, you will end up very badly." That bead was not something else, it was condensed from green fire. When Yu Qianqiu heard that the person was so weak despite having an early-stage netherworld venerable cultivation, he knew that part of the reason was that he had already been injured by Grey Cloud Enchanting, but the most important reason was that his own fire arts could restrain the person. Yu Qianqiu recalled the time when he used fire arts to suppress Ghost General Meng Yan in the Demon Ghost region. The extreme young flames were the bane of ghosts and spirits, and they were very useful in the netherworld. Thus, he had a sudden idea and condensed a green fire pearl for the person to swallow. If the person was forced out by force, or escaped the range of the green fire pearl, then the green fire pearl would immediately explode into a fierce green fire in the person's stomach. It would be strange if this ghost-type netherworld monster did not turn into ashes. Yu Qianqiu's body flashed out of the glacier after he had placed a restriction on the other party. Nearly 100 purple flying swords broke through the ice and flew into his sleeves with a whoosh. Grey Cloud Enchanting stared at his sleeves for a while, then looked at the person in the ice cave and said, "What did you give him to eat? In any case, he's not a good person. If he dares to disobey, I'll make sure he doesn't even have the chance to cry." Yu Qianqiu chuckled. The people in the ice cave shuddered at his words. Suddenly, a sinister laugh was heard from above. "Stop playing dead down there. Get up here." Bang, bang. Hua. Rumble. Strange sounds came from both ends of the Netherworld River. After the entire glacier trembled, it was finally unable to withstand the scouring of the Netherworld River. It broke away from the solidification of the two sides of the river and slowly floated downstream along with the Netherworld River. The glacier beneath their feet shook violently from time to time. Dense spiderweb-like cracks had already begun to appear. Yu Qianqiu and Song Yunxin stood firmly on top of it, watching the person climbing out of the hole in the ice. After that person carefully looked at the two of them, he realized that he couldn't see through their cultivation at all. It was obvious that they were both stronger than him. His entire face instantly turned bitter, and he silently cursed his bad luck. Previously, when he saw the speed of the two flying shuttles, he estimated that their cultivation should be similar to his. In addition, he saw that they were people from the celestial world and not locals, so he didn't take them seriously. In the end, he suffered such a disaster. Little did he know that Song Yunxin was being careful and didn't dare to fly too fast. But there were people who came to seek death. "Thou art of the Netherworld River's water tribe. We are flying in the air and have nothing to do with you. Why are you waiting for an opportunity to harm us?" Song Yunxin shouted coldly. Yu Qianqiu couldn't help but glance at him. He realized that once this fellow came to the Netherworld, the way he spoke immediately changed. In the celestial world, he was very unscrupulous and arrogant. Here, no matter how ruthless he was, he always had a bit of a diplomatic tone. He was very similar to those people in his previous life, which made people a little uncomfortable. The person said weakly, I really didn't mean to target you. Before you came, I had already set up the mirage mist formation, but you just happened to barge in. Stop your F***king nonsense. The netherworld isn't your home. Do you think it's reasonable for you to rob us here? That. Yu Qianqiu pointed at his nose and asked, River Clam Demon, what's your name? From their tone, one could tell that the younger one was obviously not a kind person. The person immediately nodded and said, this lowly one is Xinyu. Xinyu? Yu Qianqiu paused for a moment. He realized that it was indeed a monster from the Netherworld River. Even its name was strange. Xinyu, tell me honestly. Why did you set up a formation here to harm people? River Clam Xinyu replied weakly, there are often people from the celestial world coming and going on this road. This lowly one is sick of the food in the Netherworld River, so I wanted to change my taste. Yu Qianqiu and Grey Cloud Xian's expressions twitched. They didn't expect to almost become food in someone else's mouth. At this moment, the glacier under their feet shook violently again, and the sound of ice cracking could be heard. The entire glacier continued to split into smaller pieces, and the ice beneath their feet flowed even faster. Were we trapped by his mirage mist formation for a few hours? Yu Qianqiu suddenly asked Grey Cloud Xian. The latter nodded in confusion. Yu Qianqiu squinted at Xinyu and sneered. A few hours of delay, and now there's a burden. Hee. Xinyu, I can't vent my anger. Tell me, why should I spare your life? Xinyu panicked. He swallowed the bead but didn't dare to run. He waved his hand and denied, not a burden, not a burden. May I ask if the two of you are going to Twilight City? The two looked at each other. Yu Qianqiu asked suspiciously, how do you know? This lowly one only deduced it from the direction the two of you were flying in. As long as the two of you spare my life, I'm willing to take the two of you on the river. I won't be slower than the two of you in the air, Xinyu begged. He didn't doubt that Yu Qianqiu would kill him if he was unhappy. This Netherworld River connects to Twilight City? Yu Qianqiu confirmed with Grey Cloud Xian. Grey Cloud Xian nodded. Twilight City is indeed not far from the Netherworld River. Then hurry up. Yu Qianqiu waved his hand and shouted. Xinyu had a green fire bead in his body, so he wasn't afraid of him playing tricks. Yu nodded in delight. He twisted his limbs and the wounds on his body healed at a visible rate. Even his palm, which had been blasted apart by the flying sword, had recovered to its original state. However, his dark face appeared somewhat pale. Clearly, this method of healing consumed a lot of his cultivation. Suddenly, Xinyu quickly retreated more than 10 meters on the glacier and crawled on the cracked ice. His body flickered, and a huge river clam appeared on the ice. It was dark brown and oval in shape. It was more than 10 meters long and 4 to 5 meters thick. It was very rare. Grey Cloud Xian was a knowledgeable person, but he couldn't help but exclaim, for a river clam to grow to your size, it must have cultivated for a long time. Yu Qianqiu was also amazed. He was a cultivator, so he knew that it was extremely difficult for this kind of shellfish to cultivate. It was many times more difficult than other animals. It was a miracle that it could grow to such a large size. Xinyu's voice came from the huge river clam. He smiled bitterly and said, I lived for 500,000 years in ignorance. Later on, my spiritual wisdom appeared, and after 500,000 years, I was lucky enough to find the knack of cultivation. After 200,000 years of cultivation, I have achieved what I have today. Great immortals, please get on my back. I will take you to Twilight City. Yu Qianqiu and Sungin Xian were shocked when they heard this. They looked at each other and then flashed to the back of the giant clam. Great immortals, sit tight. As soon as he finished his words, the oval-shaped giant clam started to move on its own at an extremely fast speed. With a swish, it slipped away on the ice surface. In the blink of an eye, it slid out of the ice and plunged into the cold Styx River. Its back was less than 1 meter above the water, but the surface area was more than 3 meters square. It was enough for Grey Cloud Xian and Yu Qianqiu to stand or sit. Shen Yu wasn't bragging. His speed in the water was indeed not slower than Grey Cloud Xian's flying shuttle. The two stood on his back and felt the coolness of the Styx River. They looked at the scenery of the underworld and felt refreshed. The strangest thing was that when such a huge river clam moved through the water, not a single splash was made. Not even the slightest sound could be heard. It could be seen that this old and experienced fellow in the Netherworld River was really good at manipulating water. Grey Cloud Xian suddenly looked at Yu Qianqiu with a strange expression. With his vast experience, he must have taken advantage of Yu Qianqiu and experienced the feeling of swimming in the Styx River for the first time. If he told the people of the Heartless Palace about this experience, they would definitely be fascinated. Everyone had vanity. It depended on which aspect it was. Yu Qianqiu didn't know that Grey Cloud Xian had such vain thoughts. After he recovered from his shock, he looked around and sat on the slightly protruding shell in the middle. He patted the shell and said, "Shen Yu, from what you said earlier, you've lived for at least 2 million years. I've lived for so many years in vain. I'm not as powerful as the two great immortals." Shen Yu was humble to show that he had lived for so many years. Legend has it that the Styx River flowed through the entire underworld since ancient times. There are even rumors that say without the Styx River, there would be no underworld. There are even more exaggerated sayings that say without the Styx River, there would be no living beings in the three realms. Although these are all exaggerations, I think only such an ancient river can have living beings like you who have lived for millions of years. Grey Cloud Xian sighed as he faced the cool breeze of the Styx River. Then, he looked at his feet and said, "You can live for 500,000 years before your intelligence is developed. I think you must be an ancient mutant, similar to the fierce beasts in our celestial world. Otherwise, normal living beings can't live for so many years before their cultivation is complete." Hee hee. Great Immortal, you flatter me. It would be great if I was an ancient mutant. Shen Yu smiled bitterly and said, "Ancient mutants that can live as long as me can more or less have a place in the Styx River with their talents and abilities. They won't wander around the Styx River like me." Chapter 998. You're not. Sungin Xian was taken aback at first, then exclaimed, "How is this possible? You haven't developed spiritual intelligence and haven't cultivated yet. How can you live for 500,000 years?" Yu Qianqiu was also stunned. Although his cultivation level wasn't high in the immortal world, he still knew some basic knowledge about cultivation. If it wasn't a prehistoric ferocious beast, or an extremely special kind of ferocious beast that had accidentally devoured a now extinct heavenly treasure in a distant era, it was possible for it to live for hundreds of thousands of years with its strong physical body before it developed spiritual intelligence. Even so, it was still rare to hear of someone living over 500,000 years. Even those immortals had never heard of anyone who could live for more than 1,000,000 years. Of course, this wasn't to say that immortality was fake. It was just that the rise and fall of immortals were unpredictable. No one could predict what accidents would happen. It was as if there was some mysterious power that didn't allow a person to live forever. No matter how healthy one's physical body was, there would always be all kinds of calamities that forcefully took away one's life. The most common was fighting and killing for the sake of profit or grudges. This was the culprit that took away an immortal's life. Even Immortal Emperor Jin Tai, who controlled the immortal world, and Underworld Emperor Bai Qi, who controlled the underworld, didn't live for more than 500,000 years. It should be known that 500,000 years was definitely not a small number when compared to the passing of time. I don't know why either. Shen Yu sighed. Yu Qianqiu and Sungin Xian glanced at each other. There was some suspicion in their eyes. They felt that this river clam was either bragging and hadn't lived for that long, or it didn't want to talk about it. Sungin Xian gave him a look, as if to ask him to continue. Maybe he could get something out of it. Yu Qianqiu rolled his eyes, as if saying, "I'm your enemy, why should I listen to you?" Sungin Xian was speechless. In fact, Yu Qianqiu had other thoughts in his mind. This Jiu Yu's life is in my hands. If he really has a secret that he can't keep to himself, then it must be a big secret. I'm the only one who knows about it. Why should I let Grey Cloud Faith know about it? Both sides of the Netherworld River were gloomy. From time to time, specks of flowing light would dance in the air. Serpent carried the two of them and rode the waves without slowing down. The rolling waves of the Netherworld River retreated quickly like smoke. However, the waves in front of them came again, and they could not see the end of the waves. It was unknown when Sungin Xian had also sat down. He sat back to back with Yu Qianqiu. The two of them were silent as they sensed the heroic and vicissitudes of the Netherworld River. Looking at both sides of the river, there were sometimes plains, sometimes mountains, and sometimes gloomy valleys. Although they could not see clearly, the feeling of vastness made their hearts tremble. This feeling was indescribable. Yu Qianqiu, a newbie who had just arrived in the Netherworld, didn't think much of it. He felt that the Netherworld should be like this. On the other hand, Sungin Xian, who had been to the Netherworld several times, sighed with emotion. He did not expect to see the Netherworld in a completely different way when he traveled quickly on this ancient Netherworld River. It was as if only the Netherworld River understood the Netherworld the best. This was because every section of the winding river was created by it. It was washed and settled by the endless years. It was an ancient and gloomy beauty of vicissitudes. Perhaps darkness was the most primitive beauty. The Netherworld River was sometimes wide and sometimes narrow. However, the widest part was still a few hundred meters wide. Yu Qianqiu, who was looking at the scenery with his elbows on his knees and his palms supporting his chin, suddenly asked, "Serpent, how wide is the widest part of the Netherworld River?" "I've tried to cross the widest part once before. However, I walked and stopped from time to time and often changed directions." "It took me a few years," Serpent replied seriously. "I'm afraid that with my current speed, I'll need to swim for more than a month to get from the other side to this side. I'm not sure how wide it is exactly." "So wide?" Yu Qianqiu and Sungin Xian exclaimed at the same time. Obviously, it was Sungin Xian's first time hearing about it. The two of them suspected that Serpent was born to boast. He said that he had lived for more than 1,000,000 years, and now he said that he had created such a wide river. Was this really a river? It was more like a sea. Yu Qianqiu licked his lips and chuckled. "I say, Serpent, you might have misunderstood me. You've mistaken the length of the Netherworld River for its width. I'm talking about the distance between us now." "Haha. Great deity, you might think that I'm old and confused, but I'm not so old that I can't tell the difference between length and width. Speaking of the length of the Netherworld River, it's not something we can reach in a month with our current speed." Serpent sighed. "Take the direction we're going now. If everything goes smoothly, it will take half a month to reach Twilight City. Then, we'll have to walk for another month before we can reach the endless horizon, and this is under the condition that everything goes smoothly." Endless horizon? Yu Qianqiu turned around and asked Sungin Xian, "Do you know that place?" Sungin Xian also turned around and nodded. "I've heard of that place, but I've never been there. It seems that the people from the Netherworld that I've come into contact with are quite afraid of that place, and no one is willing to talk about it too much. That place is known as the punishment land of the Netherworld, so of course they're afraid." Serpent laughed and continued. "Speaking of the endless horizon, you should be able to imagine that the distance that the Netherworld River traverses through is already incredibly long when you hear the word endless. After passing through the endless horizon, it's the boundless and mysterious land of darkness. I'm afraid no one knows how long the Netherworld River is there." Yu Qianqiu and Sungin Xian immediately gasped when they saw something specific for comparison. They finally understood how long the Netherworld River was. Its length was a concept that was very, very long, as if it was very far away, but no one could tell exactly how long it was. This was the length of the Netherworld River. While Sungin Xian was still in shock, Yu Qianqiu was already distracted. This was because Serpent mentioned the boundless and mysterious land of darkness. Rumor had it that Bai Changchun escaped to that place when he was being chased by the Emperor of the Netherworld. In this way, there was no need to go to Twilight City to inquire about the information. According to Serpent, they could just follow the Netherworld River and cross the endless horizon to reach there. But then again, since it was along the way, there was no harm in going to Twilight City to take a look. If the World Commerce Chamber really grew stronger one day, they would inevitably have to deal with that place. It was a good thing for him to explore the situation first, but that endless horizon, Serpent, what do you mean when you say that the endless horizon is the land of punishment in the Netherworld? Yu Qianqiu smiled. Also, you said that they are naturally afraid, but from what you said, you don't seem to be afraid at all. Haha. Serpent explained with a smile, the Netherworld is not as stable as the Immortal world. You must have heard of the degree of chaos here. Many restless people who offend the Netherworld Royal Palace will be captured and sent to the Endless Horizon for punishment. Their dantian will be sealed so that they can't self-destruct or use their cultivation. They will be forced to do all kinds of hard labor day and night until they die of exhaustion. This kind of punishment is quite cruel to criminals. Many criminals can't stand this endless torture and commit suicide. However, this is the Netherworld. Even if you commit suicide, there are ways to imprison your primordial spirit and soul, reforge your body, and let you be reborn with your memory. You will continue to suffer until you die of exhaustion. This is called living a life worse than death. Begging for life, begging for death. The endless horizon also has another meaning, which is endless torture. Hearing this, Yu Qianqiu and Grey Cloud Xian were silent. They didn't think that the so-called endless horizon was such a den of demons. They had never heard of such a way of punishment. The two of them could imagine the misery and suffering that the prisoners who were imprisoned there had to go through. Just imagine, even the right to die was taken away. Such a cruel punishment made the two of them shudder and their scalps go numb just thinking about it. As for why I'm not afraid of the endless horizon, it's because the Netherworld Royal Palace has no right to punish us. The Netherworld Royal Palace and the Netherworld Royal Palace have an agreement that we will not invade each other. If the people of the land invade us, we will report to the Netherworld Royal Palace and ask them to give us an explanation. Similarly, if we invade the people of the land, they will also report to us and we will also have to give them an explanation. I've heard of this. Grey Cloud Xian interrupted. That's why I found it strange that the Netherworld Royal Palace would attack us. We didn't offend you. You are from the Immortal realm. Naturally, you are not included in the agreement between the Netherworld Royal Palace and the Netherworld Royal Palace. Jiu Yu said weakly, his voice much softer. Grey Cloud Xian and Yu Qianqiu couldn't help but look at each other. This reason was simple and sufficient. Who asked them to not be from the Netherworld Royal Palace? Huh? Yu Qianqiu stood up and looked at Grey Cloud Xian. Isn't the Netherworld Emperor in charge of the entire Netherworld? Why is there an exception for the Netherworld Royal Palace? Grey Cloud Xian shook his head and said, I don't know. In any case, I heard that if the people of the Netherworld Royal Palace touch the Netherworld Royal Palace for no reason, they will be severely punished. Even most of the people of the Netherworld Royal Palace don't know why. But... As he said this, he lifted his heel and knocked on the shell. Since you have lived for so many years, you must have more experience than the people of the Netherworld Royal Palace. Moreover, you are one of the Netherworld Royal Palace's people. I'm sure you can answer our questions. Hee hee. Jiu Yu laughed proudly. This reason shouldn't be hard to guess. Since it is not under the Netherworld Emperor's control, it is naturally because he can't control it. Hearing this, the two looked at each other again. This reason was indeed simple, but it was also reasonable. It was just that people had thought too much about it and had confused themselves. But once they faced the truth, they realized that it was not a trivial matter. Yu Qianqiu said suspiciously, could it be that there is an expert in the Netherworld Royal Palace that even the Netherworld Emperor fears? Chapter 999. I don't know if there are any powerful cultivators in the Underworld River that even the Emperor of the Underworld is afraid of, Xun Yu said slowly. Said Jiu Yu unhurriedly and slowly, but I know that in those broad areas of the Styx River, many aquatic creatures have lived much longer than me. I think there must be some powerful ones among them. His words were useless. Sangin Xian and Yu Qianqiu looked at each other and felt that this clam was not very honest. He had lived in the underworld river for millions of years. How could he not have heard of the powerful cultivators in the underworld river? Even if he hadn't heard of all of them, he must have heard of some of the more famous ones. But he used, I think, to brush us off. Sure enough, he was insatiable after we showed him some respect. The corner of Yu Qianqiu's mouth curled up into a sneer. Just as he was about to show Xinyu how powerful he was, he saw that the netherworld river basin in front of him suddenly opened like the mouth of a kettle. It was as if it had instantly rushed into the vast sea. At the same time, Xinyu slowed down until he completely stopped, floating quietly in the underworld river. An arched mountain appeared on the surface of the river in front of him. The mountain was 100 meters high, and the belly of the mountain was empty. The water rolled through the belly of the mountain, and the foot of the mountain on both sides seemed to be in the underworld river. Rather than a mountain, it was more like an open door, giving people a feeling that it led to an unpredictable future. There were scattered fluorescent stars dancing in the sky from all directions, as if they had been summoned by some mysterious force. They all flew toward the hollow mountain in the underworld river. Finally, they gathered and hovered in the hollow belly of the mountain. For a moment, they looked like countless glowing beads hanging on the water surface, sparkling under the reflection of the river. It was dark all around, except for this place, which was the only bright pearl in the entire underworld, embedded in the belly of the mountain. It was so beautiful. Sangin Xian and Yu Qianqiu looked at each other, not knowing what it meant. Coincidentally, a fist-sized ball of fluorescent light flew past the two of them. So, Yu Qianqiu took out a long sword and stabbed the ball of fluorescent light as if he was stabbing a roast chicken. Grey Cloud Xian instantly rolled his eyes, and he cursed in his heart, "Isn't this kid a little too audacious?" He attacked blindly before he figured out the situation. This is the netherworld. Don't you want to live anymore? But since he had already done that, Grey Cloud Xian craned his neck over to take a look. He saw that there was actually a fist-sized firefly stuck in the tip of the sword. It had a ferocious appearance, and its jaws were as thick as a thumb. The ball of light trailing behind it was abnormally bright, and under the illumination of its tail, it was impossible to see what it was unless one took a closer look. F***CKU. I was wondering what it was, so it's a firefly. It's rare to see such a big one. Yu Qianqiu snorted. Grey Cloud Xian also nodded slightly. So it was a firefly, so there shouldn't be any trouble. He was finally relieved. Just as the firefly was struggling in pain after its chest was pierced by the sword, a group of fast-moving streams of light in the distance seemed to have been attracted by the strange scene here. They immediately changed their direction and flew over quickly. Not long later, more than 100 people appeared in the sky, looking at the strange scene in the belly of the mountain. Grey Cloud Xian looked at those people and frowned slightly. It's the people from Hidden Dragon Villa. The moment he spoke, those people immediately turned around. When they saw Grey Cloud Xian and Yu Qianqiu, they were all stunned. The person in the lead took the lead and flashed over, and the others also flashed over. The person in the lead cupped his hands and said, "So it's Heartless Palace's High Priest Grey. Prime Minister Ding greets you." Grey Cloud Xian cupped his hands perfunctorily and said, "So it's Hidden Dragon Villa's Elder Ding." With that, he proudly turned his head to the side. Everyone didn't pay much attention to his arrogant actions. With his cultivation, he was completely qualified. What everyone admired most was that this Grey Cloud Xian was really skilled and bold. He actually dared to stand in the Netherworld River and look at the scenery as if nothing had happened. He completely ignored the danger that could appear at any time. How bold! Everyone mistakenly thought that the two of them were standing on a rock in the Netherworld River. For a moment, no one noticed that there was a giant river clam floating in the water below. Everyone's gaze fell on Yu Qianqiu. After a moment of suspicion, Ding Xiang cupped his hands and asked, "Could this be World Commerce's Yu Qianqiu, the sect leader?" From this, it could be heard that they had also heard about Grey Cloud Xian protecting Yu Qianqiu. Gray Cloud Xian's expression twitched when he heard that. That's right. Yu Qianzhou held his sword and cupped his hands to return the greeting. I've long heard of Hidden Dragon Villa's Elder Ding's great name. Seeing you today, you truly live up to your reputation. Elder Ding, please take care of me in the future. This fellow had never heard of Ding Xiang. However, since they had met without enmity, it wasn't tiring to be sweet. It would be a waste not to say nice things. Hee hee. I've been representing Hidden Dragon Villa in the Netherworld for a long time. I'm not famous in the Immortal world. On the other hand, I've heard of sect leader Yu's reputation in the Netherworld. Ding Xiang smiled modestly. However, looking at the smile on his face, he should be really happy. Everyone liked to hear nice words. The Hidden Dragon Villa group looked at Yu Qianzhou with more kindness. Their gazes more or less looked at the firefly stuck in Yu Qianzhou's sword. After Yu Qianzhou noticed it, he immediately wiped his sword with 2 fingers and flicked the dimming firefly into the water. He then put away the sword in his hand. At this moment, there was a splash on the water surface. Everyone's gaze turned to the water surface not far from Yu Qianzhou. The water rippled, and a round mouth suddenly appeared underwater. It swallowed the firefly that Yu Qianzhou had flicked to the surface. After this unknown thing swallowed the firefly, it quickly turned around and dived back into the water. As it turned around, everyone could faintly see black scales. They didn't know what monster it was. There's something in the river. Ding Xiang shouted softly. The group of people coordinated well and instantly teleported to a higher position in the sky. They stared at the river below with shining eyes. Yu Qianzhou was also startled. He pulled out the sword he had just put away and was on guard. A sword also appeared in Gray Cloud Xian's hand. He coldly swept his gaze over the river, but there was no longer any movement on the river. Shinyu, didn't you notice that there was something in the water just now? Yu Qianzhou asked as he patted Shinyu's shell with his foot. Don't worry, this is a nether river black carp. It won't hurt you, Shinyu said excitedly. Nether river black carp? You mean the thing in the water was a carp? Yes. The conversation between the two fell into the ears of the people in the air, and it immediately caused a burst of surprise. It turned out that there was a living thing under their feet. When they looked carefully, they found that it actually faintly looked like the outline of a clam. There was such a big clam? Even though this group of people often traveled the netherworld, they had never seen such a huge clam. Yu Qianzhou could hear the excitement in Shinyu's voice. He raised his eyebrows and said, Shinyu, why did you suddenly stop here? Is something going to happen? That's right. Shinyu said excitedly, Dragon Transformation Gate. It's a legendary spectacle that only appears once every 100,000 years. I didn't expect to see it. This is such a great fate. If we can witness the legendary scene of transforming into a dragon, we will be honored. Everyone could feel the rare excitement in his words, especially the 2 words, Dragon Transformation, which made everyone's spirits rise. However, they still didn't understand what he meant. Yu Qianzhou looked around curiously and said, Shinyu, be clear. Who is transforming into a dragon? Of course it's the Nether River Black Carp. Shinyu said excitedly, the mountain gate in front is called the Dragon Transformation Gate. Legend has it that it will summon the black carp from the river Styx once every 100,000 years. If a black carp can leap over the dragon gate, it can transform into a black dragon and leave. Of course, this is only a legend. Many people wanted to witness such a spectacle, but they always returned in disappointment. They did not see the Nether River Black Carp being summoned by the Dragon Transformation Gate. As time passed, no one believed in this legend. I didn't expect to see it this time. This is a great opportunity. Everyone was shocked when they heard that. They did not expect such a miraculous thing to happen. Yu Qianzhou vaguely felt that this story was familiar. After being stunned for a while, he exclaimed in shock, There's a carp leaping over the dragon gate here too? As soon as these words came out, everyone's gazes focused on him, each of them filled with suspicion. Sungin Exan knew he would not get an answer, but he could not help but ask, "Where did you see a carp leaping over the dragon gate?" Yu Qianqiu was speechless. After his expression twitched awkwardly, he chuckled and said, "I've never seen such a mysterious thing before. I just think it's a little ridiculous. Could it be that a carp can really transform into a dragon after crossing the dragon gate?" Sungin Exan looked at him up and down suspiciously. He paused and said, "The mystery of the netherworld cannot be predicted with common sense. Since there is such a legend, there must be a reason for it. Hee. I hope that's the case. Then we'll have a feast for our eyes." Yu Qianqiu laughed perfunctorily. Seeing that everyone was looking at him with twinkling eyes, he stomped his foot and changed the topic. "Xinyu, you just mentioned some great opportunity. Even if the black carp leaped over the dragon gate and transformed into a dragon, what does it have to do with us?" "You can't say that." Xinyu's tone was filled with yearning. Legend has it that among those who witnessed the black carp transforming into a dragon, there would always be someone who would form a good relationship with the black dragon and receive the black dragon's blessing in the future. Don't you think it's a great opportunity?" "I see." Yu Qianqiu rubbed his chin and muttered. Suddenly, he felt that the sword in his hand was unusually dazzling. How could a good relationship be related to a weapon? He quickly put it away. Beside him, Sungin Exan also put away his sword. In short, everyone's eyes flickered with excitement. They were all dreaming of the legendary spring and autumn period. Bang! With a deafening sound, a bolt of purple lightning suddenly pierced through the night sky and directly struck the pitch-black and bare mountain gate. The gate was covered in purple lightning for a long time before disappearing. While everyone was still in shock, they suddenly felt a majestic and ancient aura slowly spread out from the mountain gate that stood in the water like a ripple. It was so frightening. Chapter 1000. At that moment, everyone seemed to have an illusion. The ancient and majestic aura that spread out like a ripple seemed to be mixed with an obscure Sanskrit incantation that was whispering in everyone's ears. The voice seemed to come from above the 9 heavens, but it also seemed to have traveled through ancient times. The ancient and sacred voice lingered in everyone's mind, making them have the urge to worship the mountain gate in the Netherworld River. However, what was strange was that when everyone woke up and tried to listen carefully to what was chanting in their ears, they realized that there was no sound at all. When they relaxed, they could immediately hear the chanting of the Sanskrit incantation again. It was abnormally magical and mysterious, making it difficult for them to understand what was going on. Yu Qianqiu shook his head and felt as if someone was hypnotizing him. He focused his attention and stared at the mountain gate. He asked suspiciously, "Xinyu, did you hear that? What's going on?" "I heard it, but I don't know what's going on." "It's also my first time experiencing this," Xinyu said with a confused tone. The mountain gate was 100 meters tall, and the hole at its belly was 40 to 50 meters tall and wide. The countless fireflies that gathered there suddenly became chaotic. The surface of the water around the mountain gate was stirred, and a large group of black carps of various sizes appeared. They floated below the water and kissed the surface of the water. Their black tails and dorsal fins stirred the water from time to time. Everyone looked at each other. At that moment, everyone could see clearly that they were indeed black carps. They could not help but have more confidence in the legend of the carps leaping over the dragon's gate. The densely packed black carps that suddenly appeared in a chaotic manner immediately became orderly after a moment of chaos. They all circled around the entire mountain gate with their heads and tails in a circle. After swimming for a few laps, another river black carp that was almost 2 meters long suddenly broke away from the parade and jumped out of the water. Like an arrow, it charged at the center of the hollow mountain gate and dived into the dancing fluorescent lights. Shaking its head and wagging its tail, it opened its mouth and swallowed quite a few fist-sized fireflies before it finally lost its momentum and fell into the water with a splash. After one took the lead, the Netherworld River black carps that were patrolling behind immediately followed suit. One by one, they leaped out of the water and shot into the group of fireflies that had gathered at the center of the mountain gate. After biting the fireflies, they drew an arc in the air and fell into the Netherworld River. Not long after, the sound of water flowing out and falling into the water could be heard, rising and falling like rain. Such a spectacle was rarely seen. The strangest thing was that those fireflies would rather fly in panic inside the mountain gate to avoid being devoured, but they didn't know to fly out of the mountain gate to escape the fate of being devoured, as if they were imprisoned here by an inexplicable force. Several hours later, the number of fireflies inside the mountain gate had decreased by more than half, and the light under the mountain gate had also weakened a lot. It was unknown when Yu Qianqiu had sat down again. He looked at the group of big and small carps jumping around in front of him and almost dozed off. At first, it was a little novel, but he couldn't stand watching such boring and monotonous movements for a few hours. "Shinyu, are you sure this is a carp leaping over the dragon gate?" Yu Qianqiu asked in boredom as he sat there with his hand supporting his chin. The others also felt a little bored watching. Although those carps were strong, with the smallest one being a meter long, and the bigger ones being more than 3 meters long, they were considered big among the carps. However, they could leap more than 10 meters, 20 meters, or even dozens of meters high. Could they cross the mountain gate that was 100 meters high? Everyone felt that it was a little ridiculous. It was simply a joke for these Netherworld River black carps to leap over the dragon gate and transform into dragons. It was better for everyone to leave as soon as possible to avoid wasting time. "Of course," Shinyu replied briefly. From his tone, he was still full of energy. "Pfft." Yu Qianqiu snorted in disdain and suddenly took out a fishing rod. It was the treasure that he had taken from the 4 Islands sect masters. Sangyin Xian looked at the fishing rod in front of him and was stunned. "What are you trying to do?" Shin Yu's attention was also attracted by it. When he realized that Yu Qianqiu had taken out his fishing rod, he immediately exclaimed, "What are you trying to do?" "What am I trying to do?" Yu Qianqiu sneered as if he was saying that it was obvious. Was there a need to ask? He swung the fishing rod in his hand, and a thin white light shot out. It shot into the school of Netherworld River black carps that were hundreds of meters away. With a splash, there was the sound of water splashing. Along with Shin Yu's exclamation, a 1-meter-long Netherworld River black carp was pulled out of the water by the thin white light and flew over instantly. Yu Qianqiu quickly stood up and reached out to grab the fin that was flying over. He held the fishing rod with one hand and the Netherworld River black carp with the other. Disregarding the water droplets that the struggling carp splashed on his face, he continued to chuckle. "What a fat and big carp. I think you can forget about leaping through the dragon gate. How about? I wonder what it tastes like." The group of people in the sky looked down speechlessly. One should know that those who came from the celestial world would be warned by their seniors to abide by one rule, which was to try not to provoke the water race in the Netherworld River. However, this guy was too bold. Sangyin Xian was stunned. "Yu Qianqiu, what are you trying to do? Let it go quickly. Don't cause any trouble." "What trouble can there be? There are millions of Netherworld River black carps here. Didn't I just catch a carp?" Yu Qianqiu licked his lips. "Although it's a little dark, it must have a unique flavor." His meaning could not be more obvious. He wanted to taste the Netherworld River black carp. Shin Yu, who was stunned, immediately came back to his senses and exclaimed, "Great Immortal, quickly let him go." Yu Qianqiu stomped his foot on the shell and snorted. "When King wanted to eat us, why weren't you so polite? I just wanted to eat a carp of your water race. What are you so anxious about? If you don't want to die, shut up." "Wah! Let me go." A child's voice came. Yu Qianqiu's eyes immediately widened. The fin that was in his hand turned into a small, tender arm. The Netherworld River black carp that was tied up by the fishing line turned into a little boy wearing a black dudu. The little boy had a small braid on his head, and there was an intricately crafted golden chain around his neck. He was currently struggling on the fishing line, looking at Yu Qianqiu with a horrified expression. F***ck. Yu Qianqiu cried out in alarm and immediately let go of the little arm he was grabbing. He looked at the little boy struggling on the fishing rod in a daze. He was not primitive enough to eat humanoid animals. At the same time, he faintly felt that he was in trouble. Enchanting carefully sized up the little boy. He realized that he was already at the final stage of the tribulation transcendence stage at such a young age. He could transform. Clearly, he was a demon from the Netherworld River. He did not know what kind of treasure Yuqiancho's fishing rod was. The thin fishing line could tie up a tribulation transcendence stage demon, but the demon could not break free. He immediately rolled his eyes at Yuqiancho and shouted in a low voice, "You're crazy, kid. Why aren't you letting him go?" The little boy saw that he could not escape after struggling for a while. His tender voice pierced through the night sky. "Big sister, save me." There was still help. Yuqiancho sweated profusely as he looked at the surrounding water. He lifted the fishing rod, and the little boy was immediately pulled over. He clamped the little boy's arm with the fishing rod and covered the little boy's mouth with his other hand. He squeezed out a kind smile and said, "Don't shout. I mean you no harm." Unexpectedly, the little boy looked as if he had seen his grandmother wolf. He became even more panicked and struggled desperately. Anyone who was tied up, clamped under the arm, and covered with his mouth would not believe that the other party did not mean them any harm. At this moment, the surface of the water 100 meters ahead suddenly bubbled with a diameter of 2 to 3 meters. It seemed like something was going to emerge from the water. Yuqiancho could clearly feel Shinyu trembling under his feet. It was slowly retreating. The people in the air were shocked. Gray Cloud Xian's expression changed as well. He hid his hands in his sleeves and was on guard. It seemed like the Heartless Palace's sword-drawing technique could erupt at any time. Yuqiancho also panicked. His eyes darted around, and he suddenly bent down to whisper in the little boy's ear, "I really don't mean you any harm. Do you want to make the great leap and become a black dragon?" Although he was in a desperate situation, he finally felt the pulse accurately. The little boy under his arm stopped struggling and obediently let him hold him. He stared at him with wide eyes blinking. Yuqiancho immediately heaved a sigh of relief and said, "As long as you stop shouting, I have a way to help you make the great leap. What do you think?" The little boy immediately nodded even though his mouth was covered. Yuqiancho then slowly tried to move his hand away. Seeing that the little boy was very obedient and was looking at him expectantly, he glanced at the water column that was already several meters high on the surface of the Netherworld River like a fountain. He immediately untied the little boy in a flurry and hid the fishing rod quickly. Then, he picked up the little boy with his heart thumping. He pretended to be relaxed and smiled as if he was looking at the scenery. "What's your name?" The little boy hugged his neck and replied in a childish voice, "My name is Xiao Yuan." "What's your name?" Yuqiancho immediately chuckled proudly. "My name is Yuqiancho. It means you as in leaping over the dragon's gate. Don't you think we're fated? You can just call me Brother Yu." The little boy's eyes lit up. He nodded and said, "Brother Yu." When he said that, Yuqiancho's eyes narrowed into a line. He thought to himself, that was close. Is that even possible? Many of the people from the hidden Dragon Mountain villa in the air swayed. They looked at each other speechlessly, as if they couldn't accept this reality. Enchanting looked at the little boy who was being intimate with Yuqiancho as if he was looking at an idiot. He thought to himself, no matter what, he's at the end of the tribulation stage, so he shouldn't be too young. How could he be so retarded and so easily fooled? What the hell? Shinyu, who had been slowly retreating, also shivered. He stabilized his body in the water and stopped retreating. Everyone's attention was then attracted by the water column that was more than 10 meters high. In the middle of the water column, a graceful and beautiful woman in black slowly rose. Her bright eyes suddenly looked at Yuqiancho, who was holding the little boy. "You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.